The ancient wisdom that there's a sucker born every minute has been especially pertinent given the financial disasters of the past few years. So it's time for a short and painless test. Are you sometimes just too trusting? Do you invest in things you don't really understand? Are you also a bit greedy? Then you too could be suffering from pigeon fever. Pigeons, just so you know, are what conmen call their victims. After a year of revelations about Bernie Madoff, who cheated investors out of billions, you might think Americans have wised up. Fat chance. Prosecutors and regulators tell us that even in this age of skepticism, Ponzi schemes like Madoff's are thriving. One regulator even calls it ponzimonium. Why are there so many pigeons around? We asked a few people who should know. As a student of con games and deception, were you at all surprised by the Bernie Madoff scam?
Would you be surprised if I told you that I predicted it?
For starters, we approached Ricky Jay, America's foremost card sharp, actor, sleight-of-hand artist, a man with an encyclopedic knowledge of con men past and present. He told us of a talk he gave 7 years before Madoff's fall.
Beware of someone well established in the industry.
A lecture on financial fraud to a gathering of police officers in 2001.
I would also beware of someone who will rely heavily on an affiliation with an investor group, be it religious, ethnic, or geographic.
He was describing Madoff to a T.
I think these elements will make the market ripe for any sort of pyramid or Ponzi scam, Ricky Jay.
And that is pure Bernie Madoff.
It's pure Bernie Madoff. But can I tell you another element of the con? That I actually made this page on Photoshop last night and put it into this bulletin. And I did that to prove a point. And the point is...
You got me.
Good. You set it up by saying that I was a student of cons and that I'm knowledgeable in that area, and so you allowed my supposed expertise to make you believe this is true. This magazine is true. I really have lectured to this group of police against confidence crime. Everything is true except for this page, which I slipped in last night.
So what's the moral? Trust no one.
We wouldn't want to live in a world where we couldn't be conned, because in effect we would then be living in a world where we mistrusted or refused to trust anyone. So this is the price we pay.
And pay we have. In the wake of the Madoff scandal, Ponzi perp walks have become a marathon. Texas financier Alan Stanford, accused of a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Minnesota businessman Tom Petters, convicted recently of a $3 billion scam. And Park Avenue lawyer Marc Dreier, mastermind of a mere $400 million Ponzi scheme that landed him first on 60 Minutes and then in federal prison.
I thought if somebody would ever interview me in a program such as yours, it would be for something good I've done, not something humiliating I've done.
Despite the downfall of the Dreiers and the Madoffs, Ponzi operators large and small are busier than ever, knowing we're all capable of greed, misplaced trust, and something else.
I think it's anxiety. It's anxiety that you're losing out, that other people are doing better than you are.
Stephen Greenspan is a University of Colorado professor who writes and lectures on gullibility, warning audiences that not reading the fine print or buying something on a tip from your brother-in-law are bad ideas, and that older people are particularly vulnerable to a friendly pitch from a con man. In most of the great moments of gullibility in history, the perpetrator seems to target a particular group, correct?
Yes. There have been Mormon Ponzi schemes targeting Mormons or fundamentalist Christians. Madoff mostly was aimed at Jews because he was a prominent Jewish philanthropist. So yes, there is this affiliation aspect of it because we tend to trust our own kind.
Here in 1919 is Charles Ponzi, self-styled financial wizard, loafing at his Boston mansion with his lovely wife and proud and adoring mother.
Mr. Ponzi himself promised fellow Italian immigrants he could make them rich trading in postal reply coupons, sort of the prepaid phone cards of the day. Ponzi went to prison and died a pauper.
I went out looking for trouble. I found it.
but his name lives on for the fraud he made famous.
The basic concept is robbing Peter to pay Paul. You have a fund of new money coming in, and you use the new money to pay the old investors, but at a certain point that has to stop.
Gullibility is at the very core of this, correct?
Absolutely. History is filled with examples.
Mr. J's library is replete with documents about cons, scams, and hoaxes of all kinds. Amazing animals.
And the cynocephalus was often featured on circus lots, and eventually people realized that the cynocephalus was a baboon wearing lederhosen.
Celebrated con men, including Count Victor Lustig.
This is an original wanted poster of the Count. One of the things he did in France was that he was able to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, and he was able to do it twice, which is sort of wonderful.
Mr. J reports that over the years, people really have tried to sell the Brooklyn Bridge, as well as Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square in London. And in another cautionary tale, still unfolding, pigeons were both the investors and the investment. Arlen Galbraith, who called himself the Pigeon King, convinced hundreds of American and Canadian farmers there was good money to be made raising the birds for food.
And everybody we talked to said this guy was on the up and up. Nobody had a bad word to say about him anywhere that we could find.
So Aaron and Jolene Humbert, Ohio farmers, signed up.
I've had such tremendous demand for the live birds.
The Pigeon King assured investors that pigeons would replace chickens in every pot in America and the world. He'd sell you breeding stock and buy back the offspring. Soon, barns across the Midwest and Canada were filled to the rafters with birds and high hopes.
He was building his herd, building the flock.
He had to have so many hundreds of thousands of birds a week to supply his production.
But to some, including the Attorney General of Iowa, it sounded like a Ponzi scheme. Iowa and 3 other states barred the Pigeon King from doing business. And shortly after the Humberts bought in, Pigeon King International declared bankruptcy. The Humberts lost $300,000, most of it borrowed money.
We've contacted everybody in the states we could think of. And, from elected officials to FBI to our local prosecutor. And everybody says, yeah, obviously there's something wrong here. It was a scam, but to prove it is going to be very difficult.
Galbraith declined our request for an interview. Canadian police now say he was running a Ponzi scheme. Do you blame yourselves at all?
To a point. We just didn't find the red flags popping up. So we tried it, and then we lost.
Might
lot.
go went to Vegas and put it all on red.
We would have had a lot more fun.
At least in Vegas, the odds always favor the house. Elsewhere, even the most sophisticated among us can be had. For instance, our gullibility expert Stephen Greenspan, who, after writing a book on the subject, discovered he'd lost $400,000 of his retirement money to who else? Bernie Madoff. Was it embarrassing for you?
2 days after I had the first book copy in my hand, I found that out. Well, it was painful, obviously.
And the fact was, Greenspan had never even heard of Madoff. The hedge fund managing his retirement money had simply reinvested the $400,000 with Madoff.
I don't even think I read the prospectus. I trusted the people I was turning my money over to, and I've always done that, and it's usually worked well, except in this one case.
What did your wife say to you when you confessed that you'd lost part of your nest egg?
I told you so, because I had tried to talk her into it. And she said, I don't think so.
What made her suspicious?
Maybe it was the word hedge fund.
Which brings us to Wall Street and the financial meltdown of 2008. Poking through the wreckage, many experts believe the root cause was a perfect storm, a monsoon of gullibility colliding with a tidal wave of greed.
This was a massive Ponzi scheme, and it's the biggest crime against the American economy in our lifetimes. In fact, ever.
Janet Tavakoli is an analyst specializing in derivatives, the exotic financial instruments at the heart of the meltdown. She argues that the bad mortgage loans that fueled the crisis were repackaged by investment banks, sliced into increasingly complex derivatives, and resold to other investors, even though the underlying mortgages were often virtually worthless.
You had various traders buying each other's products to artificially keep the prices up so that the bubble didn't collapse.
Not only that, but the mortgage derivatives being traded were so mind-numbingly complicated, nobody understood them fully. Certainly not the pigeons, the buyers at banks, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance companies who wound up holding a bag full of worthless paper. These guys are smart guys. They're all graduates of the finest business schools in the country, correct?
Yes. If they were gullible, they're sophisticated investors. So they can't really go back to the investment banks that sold them this product and said, we've been had, because they held themselves out to be experts in these kinds of securities.
All of which proves that whether you're on Wall Street or Main Street, brain power is no defense against con men. In fact, smart guys may be the biggest suckers of all.
As someone who does sleight of hand for a living, to me the ideal audience would be scientists or Nobel Prize winners who are incredibly smart in their one area, and often, not always, have an ego with them which says, I am really smart, so I can't be fooled. No one is easier to fool. So Morley, I'm going to play you one hand of blackjack with certain propositions that make it too good to be true.
And so, determined not to be conned by him again, I sat down for a friendly card game with Mr. J.
You win all ties.
The rules were all stacked in my favor. I got 20, he showed a 9, meaning I thought it was impossible for him to win.
And God, the only thing that could beat you would be as if I had a 12 or something. Oh, which I do. You see, I have the 12 of clubs. So I have 21 to your 20.
But there's no such thing as a 12 of clubs, right? Wrong. Not only did Mr. J manipulate the cards somehow to get the ones he wanted, he was also dealing from a deck used in certain rummy games that includes 11s, 12s, and 13s. This pigeon had been had again.
And the other real element of the con is that I told you this was too good to be true. Anyone should stand clear of something that's too good to be true.
Because it never is.
It never is.
When a used car dealer tells you that a car is a real cream puff, almost like new with low mileage, hang on to your wallet. The car may have been around the block a lot more times than the odometer, the mileage meter, shows. Sellers turn back that clock to make buyers think the car is in better shape than it really is. And in Houston 9 months ago, we saw how easily it's done.
Well, there are two ways to do this. I'm going to do it the easy way.
This is not a demonstration for our television camera. What you're watching is a crime in progress. This man is adding about $2,000 to the value of this 1985 Buick by losing 50,000 miles off the odometer. In the used car business, it's called busting miles or whipping miles.
Where you grab them has a whole lot to do with how they turn out.
He doesn't know we're taping him. We set up a hidden camera in a nearby van before he arrived. He charges $50 a car and expects to make $400 today, tax-free, and he didn't even start until after lunch. These are the men who hired him, John Hazlett and Charles Vance, two former used car dealers who invited us down to Houston to help expose the crooks.
As far as odometer rollback men themselves, the person that does the mechanics of it, there's, I would say, 50 in town.
Find them in the yellow pages?
No, but you can pick up the phone and do it. We did it. We had them waiting in line to do it.
The reason Charles Vance and John Hazlett know so much about the used car business is they were in it for 20 years until they got fed up and quit. They told us so many of their competitors were rolling back miles, there was no way to survive in the business without doing the same thing. Houston police told us they were trustworthy and reliable.
The way the business is right now, it's completely dominated and controlled by mile busters, which has inflated the car prices to a certain level that a legitimate wholesaler cannot operate in it.
One of the first people Charles and John introduced us to was Bill Whitlow, the heavy-set fellow in the boss hog hat. He's been a used car wholesaler for 40 years and is called the granddaddy of the Houston Mile Busters. Whitlow will buy a trade-in from a used car dealer, roll back the miles, then sell it to a different dealer. Our camera was hidden across the street when Whitlow began bragging about the tens of thousands of miles he's rolled off these cars.
That one was 65.
65. What's on it now?
And that one was 70. I know what it was.
And they're 40 and 40 now?
Now let's see what they are. This got 39.
39,000 now.
That got 42.
But rolling back the miles is only half the trick. The title has to be forged to match the new odometer reading. Charles and John told Whitlow that they already had somebody who could forge the titles. Whitlow said he could do it better and probably cheaper.
What's they been charging?
$200 a copy.
Oh, damn. I ain't gonna tell you who's doing mine, but
Well, how much will you charge me? I don't want to know who's doing it.
$100 a copy.
Damn, we'll go for that.
What about if
Immediately.
What about if John gives you like 30 of them a week? Any cheaper?
We'll make a deal.
Okay.
Well, you'll handle them all.
Yeah.
So Charles gave Whitlow a title and asked him to forge it, lowering the odometer reading by 60,000 miles. When Whitlow brought the finished product by the next day, we had the camera concealed behind a wall in Charles and John's office. I put on sunglasses and posed as a friend of theirs who might want to invest $100,000 in Whitlow's rollback operation.
He's already changed the miles, and you can virtually not detect it.
I had never had one kick back on me. I guess I've been lucky, but I guess I ain't.
You that are good.
Just good work.
Yeah, good work.
Good work and plenty of it. Plenty of titles, plenty of cars.
How many of these you do a month?
Good months I'll do 75 myself.
Whitlow claims he makes less than $1,000 a car, but that's still pretty good money. How much money does he make a month?
I'm saying average month you'll make 50 grand.
50 grand.
Yeah. See, I'm not as fast as I used to be. I know how to.
The best part of it for Whitlow is, he says the $50,000 a month is all tax-free.
Well, I ain't filed income tax myself for 13 years, or 15 years.
But there's no wholesaler stand in this town that's making money. It's not whipping miles. Is that true?
I don't know none.
That's right.
This is not exactly legal, right?
What?
This is not exactly legal, right? What's the downside? I want to know what the downside is.
It's not exactly legal, no.
We found this Bill Whitlow special on the used car lot of Russell and Smith Ford, a 1987 Aerostar van, a real cream puff, and only 52,000 miles, according to the odometer. But Charles Vance and John Hazlett have been tracking this van. When Bill Whitlow bought it from another Houston dealer, it had 131,000 miles on it. When he resold it to Russell and Smith Ford, 80,000 miles had vanished. With our cameras hidden, we asked the salesman about the van.
52,000 miles. And you're sure of the mileage?
You know, I just figured out who this man looks like. You look like that guy that does that 60 Minutes thing on TV. You do. You look like that guy.
Steve Kroft.
Yes.
How you doing? Your name is?
Raymond Mesa.
Raymond, nice to meet
You're not
you.
Steve Kroft.
I am.
No, you're not.
I am. What would you say, Raymond, if I told you that this car had 131,000 miles on it?
Let's say you could show me.
So we showed him an odometer statement proving that when the van was sold to Bill Whitlow, it had 80,000 more miles on it. That surprised Mesa, and so did our camera.
Yeah, that's amazing.
General Sales Manager Vincent Alfano and used car manager Tom DeLisi agreed that the van had been rolled back.
Of course, we probably took it on a trade-in, and people who traded them in signed an odometer statement stating the actual miles that, that's on the car. We don't follow these people around for years. We just take cars in on trades.
Have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Bill Whitlow?
No.
Yes, I do. Yeah. You know Bill Whitlow?
Yeah.
I think you bought this vehicle from Bill Whitlow.
73 number, it's possible.
Suppose I told you that Bill Whitlow told us just about an hour ago that the only cars he ever sells all had their odometers turned back.
Would that
If he knew
surprise
me,
you?
Yes, it would.
Maybe he really was surprised, but Bill Whitlow had told us earlier that most dealers suspect his cars have been rolled back.
Well, they have an idea. They don't want to know it. You know, they got an idea, yeah.
No, that's not true, because I do not know that.
He's the only one in town that wouldn't know if he didn't.
I mean, it's just common knowledge. You know, flies gather on horses, Bill Whitlow hit miles.
Vance and Hazlett say it's not that difficult for a dealer to find out if a car's been rolled back. The dealer can check its title history, even its service record.
You could have taken 5 more minutes. You could have taken the serial number from this car, punched it into your computer, found out the last time this car was serviced, who owned the car, and what the mileage was, right?
I don't know. I imagine that's possible.
But authorities say few dealers make the effort.
If they bring it in, it looks like it's got 52,000 miles on it. It looks pretty clean. You don't see any reason to check. You don't want to know if it's got more than that.
In my opinion, it's his obligation and his job to check that car. And if a man has been in the car business for 20 years, like he said he had, and he can't tell the difference between 131,000 miles and 52,000 miles, he needs to get another job.
What percentage of the cars sitting on used car lots have had their odometers rolled back?
I'd say 40% of the cars.
Really?
I was going to say 50 out of 200 definitely, in cases that I've investigated myself.
How many Bill Whitlows are there in Houston?
There's only one Bill Whitlow. If you ask me how many mile busters there are in Houston, let's say there's probably 15 large ones and a lot of small ones. A lot of small ones.
At Greens Point Dodge, we found a red Toronado that had been whipped by another wholesaler. We showed the salesman proof that the car had gone at least 78,000 miles, even though the odometer showed only 49,000. This time, the sales manager didn't seem all that grateful for the information.
I don't have to talk to you. Hey, you want to talk to me? Come on. What's
We
the
just
deal?
had a question. Hi, my name's Steve Kroft.
I'm Jim Willis. How you doing?
From 60 Minutes. We're here looking at this car, and we just wanted to know where'd those 30,000 miles go, and how did this happen?
I have no idea.
But you've looked at the piece of paper.
Yeah, I've looked at it. Now, I'm going to call the guy that could have sold me the car and make him buy it back.
But first, he gave us one last chance.
Do you want to buy the car?
I don't think we want to buy it at the price you're asking.
Then what are you worried about it for?
Clearly, someplace along the line, this car's lost 30,000 miles. And I just want to find out if you knew about it.
No, I don't know about it.
And
we do not do anything like that.
Apparently, Greens Point Dodge did not have anything to do with the rollback. The odometer was whipped by the wholesaler who had bought the car at an auction.
What do you say right here?
170,000 cars get auctioned every week. Many are high mileage, late model cars, perfect for wholesalers who can roll up profits by rolling back miles. Anglo-American Auctions, headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, says it spent $2 million on a computer system to try and keep rollback cars out of its auctions. But Security Chief Gary Dickinson admits that he can't prevent buyers from busting the miles later.
We see where the problem is, and we're helpless to do anything about it.
Dickinson says the problem is every state has a different kind of title, and all but a few are too easy to forge.
what's the answer?
A uniform title.
So you're talking about standardized title forms throughout the country?
Absolutely.
Would that wipe it out?
It would go a long way to start.
I'll tell you what, if I had to quit it, I'd get out of the car business.
Couldn't make any money if you didn't do it.
I don't believe there's enough money for me out there if I do it as a gentleman.
I want to show you one. I want to show you one thing.
All right.
You know what's back there?
What's back there?
Yeah.
No.
There's a TV camera back there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been taping this whole thing.
Well, all right.
The good news is, we're not cops.
Well, I didn't think so.
The bad news is we're 60 Minutes, and you're not worried about the cops.
Not really.
And by the way, according to Charles Vance, the truck Bill Whitlow rode off in had been rolled back 70,000 miles. After we left, Vance and Hazlett got threatening phone calls and a more serious warning. Someone fired 2 bullets through their office wall.
The gunshots were actually about less than 100 yards from where I live, so I have a major concern for my family at this time.
Vance and Hazlett say because we came to Houston, police are now taking a closer look at odometers and dealers are taking a closer look at cars they buy from wholesalers. But the threatening phone calls keep coming.
Is this Charles Vance?
This is he.
The bullet holes you found in your building are nothing compared to the bullet holes you're going to find in your body. You and John don't stop this 60 minutes. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is your last warning. I'm telling you this right now.
In response to our story, federal investigators indicted Bill Whitlow and 4 others for odometer tampering. 2 of them have already pleaded guilty. And 3 weeks ago, a man who confessed to shooting those bullets into Charles Vance's office said he did it for Bill Whitlow in retaliation for the 60 Minutes story.
More Americans than ever rely on alarm systems, gates, or doorbell cameras to help protect their families. But statistically, you are now more likely to be the victim of theft online than a physical break-in at home. A new report from the FBI reveals that Americans lost more than $10 billion last year to online scams and digital fraud. As we first reported in May, people in their 30s, who are among the most connected online, filed the most complaints. But we were surprised to learn the group that loses the most money to scammers is seniors. Tonight, we will show you how cyber con artists are using artificial intelligence, widely available apps, and social engineering to target our parents and grandparents.
It's like a death in the family almost.
Well, she's worked so hard,
For my money, I sure have.
Susan Monahan and her daughter Tamara are talking about how the 81-year-old was conned out of thousands of dollars in what law enforcement calls a grandparent scam. Tell me about the call that you got.
There was a young adult on the line saying, "Grandma, I need your help," in a frantic voice, scared, saying, "I was driving and suddenly there was a woman stopped in front of me. She's pregnant and I hit her and they're going to take me to jail. And Grandma, please don't call my mom and dad because I don't want them to know." And I said, "Brandon, it doesn't sound like you." He said, "Oh, I have a cold, Grandma."
You think it's your grandson?
I do. And he said, "Grandma, a friend of mine has an attorney that we can use and that we can do something about me going to jail." And I said, "Yes, of course."
Monahan said the scammer, pretending to be a helpful attorney, got on the line. It was June of 2020, during the pandemic, and he promised to keep her grandson out of jail if she could get $9,000 for bail to him quickly. What other instructions were you given?
I needed to make an envelope that was addressed to this certain judge that he was going to coordinate this through, and write on there, and they gave me the name, the address, and everything else for this envelope.
Did it sound pretty legitimate?
Oh, absolutely. He had the legalese.
Monahan is a tax preparer with an MBA. The scammer kept her on the phone as she rushed to the bank. What do you say?
He said, when you go there, make sure you tell them that it's for home improvements, because they might question the fact that you're withdrawing $9,000.
Minutes after Monahan got home with the cash, a courier showed up to take it. This is video from the doorbell camera. You can hear Monahan on the phone with the scammer as she hands off the money.
She said to move your butt because they're on a deadline.
She says as soon as the courier left and the adrenaline left her body, she was filled with a sick feeling she'd been scammed.
It's just devastating.
What did they do to your mom? Beyond the money, beyond taking $9,000 from her?
Well, it's your livelihood. Sorry. It just gets you, in your gut.
The Federal Trade Commission reports scams like these skyrocketed 70% during the pandemic when seniors, home alone, went online to shop or keep in touch with family. How much money were you scammed out of?
$11,300.
$14,000.
$7,600.
Judy Addig and her husband Ron, a retired iron worker, were victims of the same grandparent scam as Susan Monahan. That's the view from their doorbell camera, as the same courier took off with $7,600 of their savings. $7,600 hits hard.
Well, that was for our, if we wanted to go on a trip or something. It was terrible. I was a mess.
Steve Savage, a retired scientist, was scammed when he opened a fake email from the Geek Squad.
The email said
that your bank account is being charged $399 for another year. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember it being anywhere close to that.
The customer service number went to a scammer posing as a representative of the company. Savage was duped out of $14,000. Esther Maestre was scammed too. The retired nurse says an alarm sounded on her iPad with a message to call tech support. She did.
He said that last night between 4 and 9 p.m., your bank account has been hacked.
And your heart probably stopped.
You know, I felt so nervous. But he said, I am going to transfer you to another guy who is a security at Chase Bank.
That fake bank employee told her hackers might be able to access her bank account and instructed her to immediately withdraw money and deposit it into a new account for safekeeping. Maestra did and lost $11,000. And have you been able to recover any of your money?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I'm the one that pulled the money out of the bank, so I won't be reimbursed.
If your house gets broken into, you call the police. If this happens,
there's no one to call.
Scott Perello is a deputy district attorney who runs San Diego's Elder Justice Task Force and connected us to the victims you just heard from. He says studies show only 1 in every 20 seniors who've been scammed report it. Often, they're embarrassed.
Most people who have not experienced this think, well, these people must have dementia or Alzheimer's. It's not the case. Our victims are sharp as a tack. We had a woman, 66 years old. She came home. She got a message on her computer from Microsoft, and the message said that she had a virus on her computer, and then that virus had somehow infected her financial accounts. Within a matter of weeks, this victim had lost $800,000.
Oh my gosh.
The scariest part of these scams is that these victims have no recourse. They're left bewildered.
What typically happens?
The seniors that have the courage to report that this has happened are being told that, I'm sorry, there's nothing we could do. And that is the reality, that a local police detective in Kansas City doesn't have the reach to go investigate a case that's being operated from the Caribbean or from Nigeria or Ghana.
Investigators have also traced scams to Europe, Southeast Asia, and Canada.
Underreporting.
To combat them, San Diego's Elder Justice Task Force has taken a new approach. Investigators collect every local fraud case, then collaborate with federal authorities to connect them.
If we have a victim that lost $12,000 here in San Diego, there is without question dozens of other victims to the same scam and millions of dollars in losses. And then once we identify that the scam is part of something much larger, then we can deliver that to our federal partners with the reach to go around the country, because these are networks. These are transnational, organized criminal networks.
In 2021, Perello helped the FBI bring down a network of criminals who stole millions of dollars from elderly victims. Remember those doorbell videos from the grandparent scam? The Courier, a 22-year-old Californian, was the starting point for the FBI's case. She's serving time for her role. But the FBI says the scam's ringleaders, 2 Bahamian nationals based in Florida, fled the country before they could be arrested.
If you don't know how a criminal thinks, then you really don't know how you can protect yourself online.
Rachel Toback is what's called an ethical hacker. She studies how these criminals operate.
So ethical hackers, we step in and show you how it works.
Toback is the CEO of Social Proof Security, a data protection firm that advises Fortune 500 companies, the military, and private citizens on their vulnerabilities. We hired her to show us how easy it is to use information found online to scam someone. We asked her to target our unsuspecting colleague, Elizabeth. Toback found Elizabeth's cell phone number on a business networking website. As we set up for an interview, Toback called Elizabeth, but used an AI-powered app to mimic my voice and ask for my passport number.
Oh, yes, I do have it. Okay, ready? It's...
Toback played the AI-generated voice recording for us to reveal the scam.
Elizabeth, sorry, need my passport number because the Ukraine trip is on. Can you read that out to me?
Does that sound familiar?
Yes. And I gave her... Wow.
Well,
I have your passport number.
I'm sitting over there. What did it say on your phone? Sharyn, how did you do that?
So I used something called a spoofing tool to actually be able to call you as Sharyn.
Oh, so I was hacked, and I failed hacking.
But everybody would get tricked with that.
Yeah.
Everybody would. It says Sharyn. Why would I not answer this call? Why would I not give that information?
Toback showed us how she took clips of me from television and put it into an app that cloned my voice. It took about 5 minutes. I am a public person. My voice is out there. Could a person who's not a public person like me be spoofed as easily?
Anybody can be spoofed. And oftentimes attackers will go after people. They don't even know who these people are, but they just know this person has a relationship to this other person. And they can impersonate that person enough just by changing the pitch and the modulation of their voice that I believe that's my nephew and I need to really wire that money.
Toback says hackers no longer need to infiltrate computers through a back door. She says 95% of hacks today happen after a user clicks on a text, a link, or gives personal information over the phone. You were able to hack my colleague Elizabeth, who is a tech-savvy millennial. What does that tell you?
Anybody can be hacked. Anybody can fall for what Elizabeth fell for. In fact, when I do that type of attack, every single time the person falls for it.
She said hackers armed with basic information, like a relative's name found online or an app that can mimic a voice or change the caller ID, can create a convincing story.
If you were to receive a phone call, a text message, an email, and it's asking for something sensitive, urgent, or with fear, that's when the alarm bells have to go off in your head and they want me to give something to them. I'm gonna take a beat and I'm gonna check that this person is who they say they are. I call it being politely paranoid.
Politely paranoid.
Be politely paranoid.
Toback has worked as a consultant for Aura, a Boston-based technology company that created software to protect the identity, passwords, finances, and personal data for entire families in one app.
So here you can see a full footprint of everything that's happening inside the family.
Hari Ravichandran is the CEO of Aura. He says their software can reroute scam calls away from grandparents.
If the parent is getting a call and we are identifying using AI that the call is a potential scam call, then they can route that call to me.
Does this stop the call from getting in?
It does.
So it just blocks the call?
When the call comes in, it will have a recording that says, let me know who you are, what's your intent. If it's an unknown person, if it's a known person that's already in your contacts, it'll go right through.
Ravichandran says AI is also used to monitor finances and alert users of problems in real time.
If I see a charge from my mom for $10 at Starbucks, that feels okay. But if there's a $500 charge from Starbucks, something's off kilter. So we try to figure out with AI contextually what's different. But if something is off pattern, you can look at that and say, okay, well, something's off here. I need to go take care of this.
San Diego Deputy District Attorney Scott Perello says more help is needed from law enforcement and the banking and retail industries to protect seniors. The FBI reports over the past 2 years, the losses from digital theft have doubled.
The trends and the data are horrifying. We have the senior population is growing exponentially every year. We have this dynamic of underreporting, and then we have the technology coming. People are convinced that AI is playing a part in maybe pretending it's the grandchild's voice. We're all just next on the conveyor belt, and we all need to do a better job.
It's been 2.5 months since Bernard L. Madoff was picked up and charged with what's believed to be the largest financial fraud in history. Yet we still don't know much more about the alleged $50 billion scam than what Madoff initially told the FBI agents who arrested him. There are still no indictments as federal prosecutors continue to unravel the case and to try and figure out exactly what happened and who all was involved. But the proof that it happened can be found in the ruined lives of thousands of victims. The one person who knows the most and is willing to talk is Harry Markopolos, the man who figured out Madoff's scheme before anyone else. He sat down with us for his only television interview. Until a few months ago, Harry Markopoulos was an obscure financial analyst and mildly eccentric fraud investigator from Boston, who most people would never notice on the street.
My modern Greek hero, how you doing?
But today he enjoys an almost heroic status, pursued by journalists and movie producers and honored by colleagues as the man who went to the Securities and Exchange Commission and blew the whistle on Bernie Madoff and his $50 billion fraud.
Thank you. Thank you. Please take your seats.
But he seems uncomfortable with all the attention and knows that he is no hero.
I stand before you, a $50 billion failure.
How many times did you send material to the SEC?
May 2000, October 2001, October, November, and December 2005, then again June 2007, and finally April 2008. So 5 separate SEC submissions.
And in spite of all of the things that you did, it still ended up in disaster.
There's nothing to be proud about in this case. I feel horrible about the result. It's been a total disaster for the victims.
It began a decade ago when Markopoulos was working for a Boston investment firm. His boss told him that Bernard Madoff, a former chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange, was running a huge unregistered hedge fund that was producing incredible returns. He wanted Harry to reverse engineer its trading strategy and revenue streams so that the firm could duplicate Madoff's results.
He had the patina of being a respected citizen, one of the most successful businessmen in New York, and certainly one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. You would never suspect him of fraud unless you knew the math.
So, I mean, you're like a math guy, right?
I've taken all the calculus courses from integral calculus to differential calculus, as well as linear algebra, and statistics, both normal and non-normal.
How long did it take you to figure out that there was something wrong?
It took me 5 minutes to know that it was a fraud. It took me another almost 4 hours of mathematical modeling to prove that it was a fraud.
What were the things that caught your attention?
It was the performance line. As we know, that markets go up and down, and his only went up. He had very few down months. Only 4% of the months were down months, and that would be equivalent to a baseball player in the major leagues batting .960 for a year. Clearly impossible. You would suspect cheating immediately.
Maybe he was just good.
No one's that good.
Harry said there were only 2 plausible explanations. Either Madoff was using insider information to rack up huge profits, or he was running a giant Ponzi scheme.
So either way, he was doing something illegal.
Either way, I knew he was going to go to prison.
In May of 2000, Markopoulos took his suspicions about Bernie Madoff to the Boston office of the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Did you have any financial motive?
Yes. He was a competitor of mine in 2000 to 2004 while I was still in the industry. And when someone's competing on your playing field, who's a dirty player, you want him tossed off the field.
He also thought he might be eligible for a sizable reward if the fraud involved insider trading, but that turned out not to be the case.
In your first letter to the SEC back in 2000, you're a little tentative. You say, look, I have no smoking gun.
In 2000, it was more theoretical. In 2001, it was a little bit more real. By 2005, I had 29 red flags that you just couldn't miss on. By 2005, the degree of certainty was approaching 100%.
Over time, and with some simple math calculations, Markopoulos concluded that for Madoff to execute the trading strategy he said he was using, he would have had to buy more options on the Chicago Options Exchange than actually existed. Yet he says no one he spoke to there remembered making a single trade with Bernie Madoff's fund.
I would talk to the people I had trading relationships with and ask, did you have a trading relationship with Mr. Bernard Madoff? And they all said, no, we don't think he's for real.
Could you find anybody?
I found no one that ever traded with Mr. Madoff, and I traded with the largest equity derivatives firms in the world.
And that's because Madoff's investment fund never actually made any trades, at least going back to 1993 and probably further, a fact confirmed last week at a meeting of Madoff investors by the trustee charged with liquidating his assets. No one knew the depth of the fraud, but a lot of people had questions.
Who else figured this out besides you?
I would say that hundreds of people suspected something was amiss with the Madoff operation. If you look at who the victims were not, you'll notice that the major firms on Wall Street had no money with Mr. Madoff.
I mean, you write this is the letter, I'm quoting from the letter to the Securities and Exchange Commission, red flag number 20. Madoff is suspected of being a fraud by some of the world's largest, most sophisticated financial services firms. And then you list some of the firms.
Yes, I do.
The biggest firms on Wall Street, and conversations with people high up in those firms.
That is correct. And the SEC ignored that.
Did they call any of these people?
All the SEC had to do was pick up the phone. They never did.
If you had executives at the biggest investment houses in Wall Street that knew something was wrong, why do you think they didn't go to the SEC?
Because people in glass houses don't throw stones, and self-regulation on Wall Street doesn't work.
In January 2006, the New York office of the Securities and Exchange Commission finally opened a case file to look into Harry's allegations about Bernie Madoff. Despite uncovering evidence that Madoff had misled them about his investment activities, the SEC closed the case 11 months later without ever opening a formal investigation. The staff said there was no evidence of fraud.
What I found out from my dealings with the SEC over 8.5 years is that their people are totally untrained in finance, they're unschooled, most of them are just merely lawyers without any financial industry experience.
Well, if the people there aren't trained in securities work, what are they trained in?
How to look at pieces of paper that the securities laws require. They can check every piece of paper perfectly and find misdemeanors, and they'll miss all the financial felonies that are occurring because they never look there. Even when pointed to fraud, they're incapable of finding fraud.
No one at the SEC would talk to us on the record about Harry Markopoulos's allegations, but one person who seemed to have had a high opinion of the agency was Bernie Madoff.
I'm very close with the regulators, so I'm not trying to say that they can't, that what they do is bad. As a matter of fact, my niece just married one.
Besides his niece's husband, who no longer works at the SEC, Madoff has had long-standing ties to the agency and has been called upon to give advice. At this 2007 meeting of a nonprofit group called the Philoctetes Center, Madoff seemed to think the SEC was doing a great job.
In today's regulatory environment, it's virtually impossible to violate rules. And this is something that the public really doesn't understand. But it's impossible for you to go for a violation to go undetected. Certainly not for a considerable period of time.
But don't try and tell that to the Philoctetes Center today. Its main benefactor, the Betty and Norman Levy Foundation, was fully invested in Madoff, one of dozens of charitable organizations that have been devastated or wiped out. Madoff's customer list, single-spaced with small type, is 162 pages long, with victims running the gamut from Hollywood royalty to a carpenter's pension fund in Syracuse, New York. Shelley Ludlow has been forced to put her mother in a Medicaid-assisted living facility while she packed up their apartment to move in with a friend, all because of Bernie Madoff.
Our whole lives were turned upside down by this man that sits in his penthouse and smirks.
The same day last week, 70 miles away, Len and Marge Forrest were leaving their house that they had just sold in Setauket, Long Island, and were preparing to drive to South Florida to sell their home there. They had their money with Bernie Madoff for 30 years and lost an 8-figure family fortune 2 days before his 80th birthday.
Do you have any money to live on?
Enough, I would say, for 60 days.
Do you know other people who are in the same situation?
Oh, yes. We have a lot. Unfortunately, and I think probably the thing that tears me up more than anything is the fact that I recommended Madoff to a number of people. And they lost their money, and I'll never stop feeling responsible for that. They were all close family and friends.
Len Forrest and his friends thought they were part of a small, exclusive group of investors lucky enough to have a connection with Bernie Madoff. And because they thought they were making 12% a year, they weren't inclined to ask a lot of questions. Harry Markopoulos called it the classic affinity scam.
An affinity scam is when you prey on groups that are similar in nature to yourself. So I'm Greek. If I was going to run an affinity scam, I would run it on the Greek-American community here. Bernie was Jewish, so he ran it on the Jewish community in the United States, but that wouldn't get him enough customers because he always needed new money to keep the scheme going.
Over time, Madoff extended his reach from New York to Palm Beach, where he enlisted hundreds of wealthy clients, many of them recruited from his own country clubs. And he also made connections that gave him entree to Europe and the hedge fund capital of America, Greenwich, Connecticut. It was here that Bernie Madoff made some of his biggest deals with large investment firms that were willing to feed him billions of dollars of their clients' money to manage. And in return, Bernie Madoff agreed to pay these so-called feeder funds a fortune in annual fees. The largest of the feeder funds was the Fairfield Greenwich Group. How much money did Fairfield make off Bernie Madoff every year?
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
If you're a feeder fund, what are you supposed to do for those hundreds of millions of dollars?
You're supposed to identify the world's best hedge fund managers and invest only in them, and you're supposed to make sure they're not running Ponzi schemes.
The real steroids here were the feeder funds. That's what made it an international Ponzi scheme.
Attorney David Boies is one of the most prominent lawyers in the country and is representing Fairfield Greenwich investors who lost nearly $7 billion when Madoff went under. They're suing the firm for gross negligence, claiming it failed to investigate Madoff thoroughly or monitor his activities as it promised to do in its marketing materials.
Analysis of portfolio composition, portfolio stress testing, risk management, asset verification. Do you think that really happened?
No, we know it didn't happen because we know all they did was turn the money over to Bernie Madoff, and they did that for 20 years.
They did nothing.
They essentially did nothing except lose their investors' money and enjoy very luxurious lifestyles from the money they took out.
Walter Knoll, one of the founding partners of Fairfield Greenwich, declined to talk to us and has reportedly been lying low with his wife at their compound on the private island of Mystique. But in a statement to 60 Minutes, his firm said that it too was a victim of Bernie Madoff, that it had placed too much trust in his then impeccable reputation and in the fact that there had been multiple reviews of Madoff by the SEC.
What do you have to say for yourself?
In the end, Harry Markopolos had been right about Bernie Madoff. He will be going to prison, but not because of anything that Harry or the SEC did. In a bad economy, Madoff's lies simply collapsed under their own weight.
No one was investigating Mr. Madoff at the end.
So he turned himself in before anybody in a position of authority began a serious investigation.
That's typically how the SEC does it. They come in after the crime has been committed. They toe tag the victims, count the bodies, and try to figure out who the crooks were after the fact, which does none of us any good.
Wall Street in shreds, the watchdogs fast asleep. Bonus-stuffed executives laughing all the way out of the busted banks. It's been some year. Oh, and we left out the Ponzi scheme of Ponzi schemes. Bernard Madoff's untidy little business that bilked thousands of people out of billions of dollars. While the mastermind is doing 150 years in prison, the big question is, where did all the money go? Irving Picard, the court-appointed trustee, the liquidator, is searching for the billions that disappeared and trying to recover as much as possible from Madoff's remaining assets. It's a daunting and thankless task. For while he's suing whoever he can on behalf of the victims, he's also suing many of the victims, those who he says benefited and should have known they were investing in a house of cards. Mr. Picard and his chief counsel, David Sheehan, have been largely silent about the details of the recovery until tonight.
Last November, just before the whole thing collapsed, Bernard Madoff sent out statements to his clients. How much were they told they were worth?
About $64.8 billion.
So the statements were total lies.
Yes, absolutely.
The $64.8 billion that investors thought they had was just an illusion, designed by Madoff to keep investors investing. Last December, the roof fell in.
Mr. Madoff, what would you say to all those people that lost money, Mr. Madoff?
Mr. Madoff has no say in the matter. If the victims want money back, they'll have to go through Mr. Picard, the decider, and his bloodhound, Mr. Sheehan.
How much real money do you think went into the whole scheme?
I'd say about $36 billion, and about
18 of it went out before the collapse, and 18 of it's just missing. And that $18 billion is what we're trying to get back.
So for the past 9 months, Picard and his team have been on a global treasure hunt. The first step, liquidation. Madoff's boats, his art, even his season tickets to the New York Mets, plus Bernie's various homes, all sold or about to be sold with a U.S. Marshal as real estate pitchman.
Your eyes are drawn directly to the chandelier, which is probably worth a pretty penny.
They didn't exactly hide their wealth, did they?
They did have the house in Palm Beach. They had a place in Montauk. They had an apartment here in Park Avenue in the city, all of which are the accoutrements of great wealth. But it wasn't an extraordinary lifestyle.
How much is all that total?
According to the government, it's over $50 million.
Just a drop in an oversized bucket, nothing close to what investors lost. So Picard and his team continued to follow the money. They started here.
So this was the scene of the crime.
Madoff's New York offices, an impressive landscape of emptiness.
His desk was here.
And close by, perhaps a work of art that sums up the entire story.
It was called the soft screw. And it was about four to 6 feet high. And it was sitting right here.
And sitting on top of the world was Madoff himself.
He was much like the Wizard of Oz, just hiding behind this wall, and no one could quite penetrate it, but they sort of really liked the results.
As far as you've been able to find out, was he ever legitimate?
No, it was never legitimate. And I think to be told the truth, which he's not capable of, he would then say, yes, I started out as a crook, and I ended up as a crook.
And a crook who looked after his family. Picard's team unearthed records showing Madoff's sons, Marc and Andrew, who ran a legitimate trading operation, and Madoff's brother Peter, the chief compliance officer, took $80 million in compensation over the past 7 years, plus millions more in personal expenses charged to the company, private jet rentals, ski vacations, and country club dues. Even Ruth, Madoff's wife, had a company credit card, and she charged millions too on everything from shopping sprees in Paris to movie rentals, all courtesy of Bernard L. Madoff Securities. Thank you very much.
They used the bank account at BLMIS like a personal piggy bank.
Of all the people that should have known, his brother and his sons who worked under the same roof with him should have known.
One would think so.
Yes. Did they know?
My belief is, yes, they knew. And the reason I believe that is they were officers of these companies and directors in certain instances as well, and also compliance officers in a very highly regulated environment. So I think clearly they would have to have known what was going on, given their own personal transactions, the longevity of what was happening, and their responsibilities as officers of the company.
Madoff's sons and brother also had accounts with Bernie, and their returns were simply spectacular.
There is sort of an extraordinary event with Peter, his brother. After 1995, we only see him putting $14 in, and he took out over $16 million. We have to take a hard look at that.
Picard says Marc and Andrew Madoff withdrew over $35 million from accounts that were opened with little or no original investment.
If they turn out to be untouchable criminally, do you intend to bankrupt them civilly?
Whether or not they have a criminal problem, we will pursue them as far as we can pursue them. And if that leads to bankrupting them, then that's what will happen.
Picard and Sheehan told us they plan to file suit this week against Madoff's sons, Marc and Andrew, his brother Peter, and niece Shauna, accusing them of negligence and breach of fiduciary duty in their roles at the company. He'll be seeking the return of $198 million that was paid out, loaned, or transferred to them.
When his brother took out money, or his sons took out money, they took customer money.
Can you lay claim to the son's real estate, for example?
I believe that we can. The money that went to buy these houses under the law is called fraudulent transfers.
Maybe, but the Madoff sons are claiming They're still owed nearly $90 million by their father's bankrupt company.
Mr. Madoff?
Marc Madoff and the other family members maintain their innocence and declined our request for an interview.
I have no comment. I'm sorry, I can't help you.
But in a statement, the Madoff sons say Picard's allegations are baseless, that they had no prior knowledge of Bernard Madoff's crimes.
If you were those sons and you knew what you knew today about where all that money came from, wouldn't you be embarrassed to keep that money? They should give it all back. And if they don't give it all back, I think we have an obligation to go get it and take it all back.
And that includes Mother Madoff, Ruth. Though she's already agreed to forfeit about $80 million in assets, Picard has sued to keep her on a very short leash.
At the moment, any time she spends over $100, she has to check in with you, correct?
She reports it to us at the end of a month.
And how is she living now?
Very modestly.
The most significant amount of money that Ruth is currently spending is on lawyers.
There is an assumption in this case that there is this stash out there, whether in Swiss banks or under the mattress. Are you assuming there is?
Yes, we
are.
What kind of money are we talking about?
We'd assume it millions and millions of dollars.
Millions and millions isn't nearly enough to cover the billions stolen by Bernie Madoff. But here's where the story takes an odd twist. Most of the money for victims will not come from the Madoff family, but from some of the victims themselves.
Most people assume that everyone lost money who dealt with Madoff.
Right.
Not true.
We've found that there have been quite a few people who have gotten out more than they put in.
In fact, about half of Madoff's thousands of victims are what Picard calls net winners, people who took out more money than they ever invested with Madoff.
We can tell that if Morley put in 100 hours and he got out 200, he got 100 hours of somebody else's money.
So the guy who's been happily taking $25,000 a year out over, say, 10 years, he's not going to get a dime out of this.
No.
Not if he took out more than he put in.
Well, say if he put in an initial $100,000.
Then he's already got more than he put in. He's been overpaid.
And are you going to try and get the difference?
Perhaps.
And he's entitled by law to get that difference back. It goes by the nicely nasty name of a clawback. If any investor took out more than they put in over the past 6 years, Picard can legally demand it back to help victims who didn't take money out. For now, Picard says Madoff's small-time winners are not his priority. He's focusing on the big winners, who claim to be innocent victims.
Now, some of the big players, I believe, actually knew exactly what was going on and participated in it.
Picard and Sheehan have sued several prominent Madoff investors saying they knew or should have known of the fraud, like billionaire investor and philanthropist Jeffrey Pickauer.
He got a statement that said his return was 950%. Now, this isn't some unsophisticated rube buying these stocks and dealing in this. This is a very, very sophisticated guy. He gets a statement like that. That's off the charts. He doesn't know anything about that.
So is he a prime suspect?
Sure. I think not only in terms of the monies that he took out, but the records with regard to the relationship, the manipulation and backdating of trades. What you had to know, or someone knew, was false.
The suit claims Pickauer took out more than $5 billion in profits since 1995. Picard is also suing another billionaire investor, Stanley Chase, who withdrew over $1 billion in profits. Both Chase and Pickauer maintain their innocence and would not comment. But in court papers, Pickauer characterizes the suit as unsupported by facts or logic. Sheehan says he thinks they knew all along and simply couldn't resist the easy money.
I think as everyone was participating in this and just feeding at this trough of greed, at the end of it, what they were looking for was it to continue. They were hoping it was never going to end.
So far, the trustee and his counsel have filed 13 lawsuits seeking the return of nearly $15 billion from the biggest Madoff investors. In addition, 233 clawback notices have gone out to Madoff friends and family who may have profited from the scheme.
This is a human tragedy. If it was
Thousands of smaller investors who were living off what they believed were legitimate profits now fear that on top of their lost nest egg, they may end up owing even more.
I open my mailbox wondering if this will be the day when the letter arrives.
Sheehan is sympathetic, but
at the end of the day, they're in a Ponzi scheme, unfortunately for them. So all they get, at best, is what they put in. And to claim that they should be getting something other than that is to suggest that some other resource should exist. I'm talking about the taxpayers coming in funding this.
So far, Picard has found nearly $1.5 billion for the victims' fund, and he's hoping to get several $billion more. But even then, victims will collect only a tiny fraction of what they lost.
We don't know how much is there, but it's going to be not necessarily pennies on the dollar, but it's only a little bit more than that. We're not going to be able to repay everyone. Not anything close to what they lost.
Madoff. It is a name that will live in infamy. It's been nearly 3 years since Bernard Madoff confessed to running a $65 billion Ponzi scheme, the largest financial fraud in history. Thousands of trusting clients who felt safe investing with a financial genius were swindled. He hadn't invested a penny. While Madoff is serving 150 years in prison, his family has had to deal with the consequences of his crimes. His wife, Ruth, divested of most of her great wealth and derided by a suspicious world. Their son, Marc, dead, driven to suicide by shame and accusations of guilt. Their other son, Andrew, isolated, trying to live with the disgrace. Are they innocent or were they willing partners? For the first time since Bernie Madoff's arrest, his son Andrew and wife Ruth speak out about crime, punishment, and the shame of being a Madoff.
It's a tough name to live with.
It sure is.
Ruth Madoff. You feel the shame?
Of course I feel the shame. I could barely walk down the street without worrying about people recognizing me.
And Andrew Madoff.
From the very beginning of this whole episode, I've had absolutely nothing to hide. And I've been eager, I would say almost desperate, to speak out publicly and tell people that I'm absolutely not involved.
Andrew and Ruth Madoff speak out in the book Truth and Consequences, a more or less tell-all arranged by Andrew's fiancée, Catherine Hooper, an attempt to separate the family from the father's crimes.
Is it dismaying for you that no matter what you say, people aren't going to believe you?
I think in many ways it is dismaying, but public opinion has to be something that doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is the truth.
It's really hard for people to believe that you didn't know, that you must have known.
I can't explain it. I mean, I trusted him. Why would it ever occur to me that it wasn't legal? The business was, his reputation was almost legendary. Why would I ever think that there was something sinister going on?
It was 1954 when Ruth Alpern met Bernie Madoff in Queens, New York.
I just saw him and I was sort of swept away, I think.
She married him at age 18. They had 2 sons, Marc, then Andrew. Bernie was building up his money management business, a typical middle-class family living on Long Island.
We were both solid parents and valued our family and so proud of our boys. It was a dream, really.
My father was certainly present as a dad.
Did he emphasize moral values at all?
I wouldn't say that we sort of explicitly discussed values, but we certainly lived what I felt was a moral life where there was a clear sense of right and wrong.
Exactly when Bernie Madoff went wrong is unclear, but as his reputation for delivering steady profits grew, the Madoffs began living the good life. A penthouse in Manhattan, homes in Palm Beach and the south of France, and yachts in both places. The family became celebrated for philanthropy, and Madoff became a Wall Street big shot.
He was a big figure in the industry. He was the chairman of NASDAQ. He was constantly being honored as Man of the Year of this organization and that had an effect on me.
Both sons went to work as traders for their father's firm in the late 80s, a time authorities believe Madoff's Ponzi scheme was well underway.
Why would your father want to taint his sons by bringing into a situation that could well spell disaster?
You know, that's a great question, and that's something that that I really agonize over as a son. You know, what my father did was so horrible, and it's hard for me to understand that, and I'm not any closer to understanding it now than I was 3 years ago.
Bernard L. Madoff Securities employed over 100 people, but it seemed like a family business. His brother Peter and several cousins worked there. Mark and Andrew worked on the 19th floor of New York's Lipstick Building, where they legitimately traded securities for the firm and for outside clients. The investment advisory business, the Ponzi scheme, was housed 2 floors below, where their father never made any trades at all. He was simply creating phony paper statements that showed steady profits for his clients, his victims. Access to the 17th floor was highly restricted.
You must have been curious about why the 17th floor was such a secret place. When you or Mark asked him about his end of the business, what did he say?
It was always a very similar response, is you guys have your business to worry about and let me worry about my business, and the conversation would end there.
But people say, look, there's no way these kids could not have, at the very least, suspected something was going on.
Well, keep in mind, these were completely separate businesses. We were executing hundreds of thousands of transactions a day, and that kept all of us incredibly busy. And it just didn't occur to me that he could be involved in any kind of criminal activity.
Andrew says his father would often walk his clients through the 19th floor to show actual trades being made.
You feel that the legitimacy of the trading business offered protection to what your father was doing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That he was using you and your brother?
Absolutely. It was one of the hardest things to come to grips with in trying to get my head around this, was that feeling that I had been used almost as a human shield by him. It's unforgivable. No father should do that to their sons.
The basic concept of Wall Street.
He says he thought his father was a financial genius. There were suspicions about Madoff's remarkably consistent returns, but the SEC repeatedly cleared him of any wrongdoing. What troubled Andrew was his father's refusal to discuss any plans for a succession.
His plan was that he had no plan, and he would say that when he dies, his end of the business dies, and again, it was always the same response. That's the way it is, and it's not going to change.
He ruled with an iron fist, but kept everyone happy with money, steady returns for investors, and for family, an endless stream of cash. Andrew and Mark were paid multi-million-dollar salaries, and the boys went to their father for even more, for houses, business ventures, and divorce settlements. Catherine Hooper says the Madoff benign dictatorship took some getting used to.
It was an adjustment, getting to understand that the boundaries in Andrew's family were probably going to be different than what I was used to.
Did you feel that Papa Madoff was the boss?
There's no question that he was.
He could be a bully, without question.
Did you ever suspect along the way either strange behavior or somebody who was bottling up a secret or any of that?
I never did. I never did. It didn't seem that way. There was nothing that would make me suspect anything. I mean, sometimes I look back and I think, as the years went on, he started to get more and more short-tempered, and maybe He just was having trouble, obviously. He had to been.
In the fall of 2008, the world economy began to implode, and markets were in free fall. Big investors wanted out. Redemption after redemption strained Madoff's scheme to its limits. On December 10, 2008, with only a few $100 million left of the billions invested with him, Madoff realized the game was over. He told his wife to transfer $10 million from her brokerage account at the firm into a personal checking account.
Did you not wonder what on earth is happening here? $10 million is a lot of money.
It wasn't atypical for him to put money in an account and take it out. I didn't think anything of it, actually.
That same morning, Bernard Madoff called a family meeting in his office.
And he started to try and speak to us, and he couldn't. He sort of fell apart, started to cry a little bit, and it was shocking to see that. I mean, this was not a man who was emotional in that way at all. He said that maybe it would be easier if we talked elsewhere, and he suggested maybe we should go up to his apartment.
He called from the office and said, I'm coming home with the boys. I have something to talk about. He came in, we went into a room, 4 of us, and he said, I have a confession to make. I've been running a Ponzi scheme. He said $50 billion.
He said, everything I've been doing is all a big lie. He said the business is a Ponzi scheme, and the firm is completely insolvent, and I'm broke. And then he just started sobbing, and I was shocked. I felt like my head exploded. I mean, I don't think if he had told me he was an alien, I could have been more surprised. He said that the firm had liabilities of $50 billion. It never occurred to me that his business had anything like that anything like that under management. It was shocking.
Your mother, what was her reaction?
She looked shocked. She asked, what's a Ponzi scheme? It was her first question. She didn't even understand that. I think it was me who answered and said that it means that it's all fake, that Dad's, he's not been doing what he says he's been doing. And he followed that up and said, yes, I've been lying to all of you all of these years. I've been lying to everybody. I've been lying to myself, he said.
And your brother?
My brother was trembling with rage. He was absolutely furious. Mark was the first one to stand up and said, I'm out of here. And he stormed out of the room. And I immediately followed him and walked out.
There's a lot of people out there who are saying, or will be saying as they watch this is all a charade. This was something that the Madoffs set up to get himself off the hook.
I wish it were. I wish it were. I wish none of this was real. I knew absolutely nothing about this before my father shared the information with me, and it was the most shocking and terrible moment of my life.
I was as stunned as they. I was kind of paralyzed. Bernie got up and said, I'm going back to the office.
Was he emotional in any way?
I don't remember that either. He must have been.
Apologetic in any way?
Probably, yes. It's sort of a blank now. I'm not hedging here. I just simply don't remember every detail. I was in such a state.
Later that day, that evening, you both turned up at the office Christmas party.
I know. He phoned me from the office and said, we have to go to the office Christmas party. So I got myself together and went over there. We stayed a half an hour, and we just went home. And the next morning, the FBI was there to arrest him at about 7 a.m.
Andrew and Marc Madoff had turned their father in. Shortly after the arrest, Ruth Madoff called Andrew, pleading with him to co-sign his father's $10 million bail bond.
And I said, forget it. There's no way. I mean, how could you even ask that question? No, I'm not signing that bail bond. That's crazy. And I was really, I was very upset that she asked, because here I had just turned my father in to the authorities a day before. And now it appeared that I was losing my mother as well, because she was siding with him.
I just wanted him to come home. I was so afraid.
Afraid of?
I mean, the whole idea of going to prison was sort of unthinkable to me. I don't think I ever knew anybody that went to prison.
Mr. Madoff, what do you have to say for yourself?
Bail was eventually guaranteed by Ruth and Madoff's brother Peter, and Bernie was released. All of his assets were frozen. But in a stunning breach of the court order barring the transfer of property, a large and extremely valuable envelope arrived at Andrew Madoff's apartment.
I tore open the envelope and dumped it out, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. These were pieces of jewelry that I recognized, things that I had seen my mother wearing over the years. And I couldn't understand how she could do this. I mean, what were they thinking? And it wasn't until 3 years later that I had a chance to ask her, what were you thinking when you sent me that jewelry? I don't understand. And she told me that she and my father planned to kill themselves. And they put together that package beforehand and sent it out.
Did they try to kill themselves?
Yes, they did.
I don't know whose idea it was, but we decided to kill ourselves because it was so horrendous what was happening. We had terrible phone calls, hate mail, just beyond anything. And I said, I just can't go on anymore. That's when I packed up some things to send to my sons and my grandchildren. I had some lovely antique things and things that I thought they might want. I mailed them. It was Christmas Eve. That added to the whole depression. We took pills and woke up the next day.
What did you take?
I think Ambien.
How many?
I don't even remember. I took what we had. He took more.
Did you leave notes?
No. It was very impulsive, and I'm glad we woke up.
But you must have talked. This is a rather large decision to make.
It wasn't hard at the time. It was impulsive, and I just wanted out.
When we come back, life in the Madoff apartment and the death of a son. The sheer scale of Bernard Madoff's Ponzi scheme shocked the world. Thousands of individuals, charities, and funds that on paper were worth a total of $65 billion were wiped out. What's more, some of his closest friends and family who had trusted him with their life savings faced ruin.
30 seconds, Dave.
With Madoff under house arrest, the world staked out his penthouse on 64th Street, obsessed by what might be happening behind the drawn shades.
There were lawyers coming for meetings at the apartment. We watched a lot of television, and I cooked.
Was there remorse? Was there
Yes, there was
guilt?
remorse.
Or was it sort of self-pity?
I think in a way he was relieved at the beginning that he was finished.
But you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, why? You could have been a perfectly comfortable, even wealthy family.
Without question.
Without this.
I don't understand it. It's hard for me to say this, but I don't think the money was the part of it. I think he got stuck. That's what he said. And he didn't have the courage to face things when they might have been able to be faced on a much smaller scale.
Madoff repeatedly told authorities that he had acted alone.
Did your wife have anything to do with this, sir?
that his family knew nothing. But who would believe Bernie Madoff?
I remember at some point we were having breakfast and I said to Andrew, you know, people will think that you were involved. And I think it had dawned on him, but it really hadn't sunk in. And as I said those words, he looked at me and said, do you really think, but that won't last. I mean, it'll become clear very quickly that we weren't involved.
Did you have any suspicion at all that your mother might have been involved, complicit in some way?
No, absolutely not. I never for a moment felt that my mother was involved in my father's crimes or was aware of it at all.
The rest of the world was skeptical. While countless stories predicted the imminent arrest of Mark, Andrew, and their uncle Peter,
Do you have anything to say to the investors?
Ruth Madoff seemed to get the worst of it. It was said she had an office at the firm, that she had been the bookkeeper.
I was the bookkeeper. I was the receptionist. I worked for Bernie. In 1961, when I graduated from college, and I left in 1963 when Mark was born, and then Andy, and I was a stay-at-home mom all those years. And later on, when the boys started to work there, we lived within walking distance, and I had an office there where I took care of decorating things and house things and boat bills and managing those things. But I was never the bookkeeper after 1963.
Probably a majority of people can't believe that you can live with someone for 50 years and not know.
It's hard for me to believe, too.
Had you known, would you have turned him in?
I'm glad I didn't. It would have been tough, but I would have left. Whether I turned him in or not, I don't know. I'd like to think I would have, but I couldn't say. I'm being completely honest with you, I have to say.
She was vilified and shunned, harassed on the subway. The press hounded her with headline after headline. Her fiercest critics were her own sons.
From the time of your father's confession, I gather you had a certain degree of estrangement from your mother. How come?
Well, she and I barely spoke for 2 years. I struggled tremendously trying to understand her decision to stay by my father's side. I felt so angry with him, so I didn't understand her choice, and I struggled with it, as did Mark.
I never thought of leaving. I don't know why I didn't. I just knew this man for so long, whom I loved for so many years. I didn't know what else to do but stay there.
3 months after his confession, Madoff pled guilty. He was later sentenced to 150 years. Ruth Madoff agreed to forfeit $80 million and all her worldly goods. All the homes, boats, cars, furniture, even Madoff's slippers were auctioned or sold.
You were allowed to keep $2.5 million. To a lot of people, that's a lot of money.
It is. It's certainly enough for me. I've used a lot for legal fees.
There is a public perception, and I'm sure you've heard it, that there's got to be a stash somewhere. You know,
I've heard it. I've heard it.
That Bernie Madoff hid it somewhere, and that you know about it,
I wish they'd find it and give it all
or you
back.
both know about it.
My understanding of a Ponzi scheme is that when it's over, there's nothing left, and I certainly don't know of a stash anywhere.
Though 8 employees have been accused of helping with the scheme, no family members have been charged. But the bankruptcy trustee, Irving Picard, and his lead counsel, David Sheehan, are demanding that all the Madoffs cough up virtually every penny they have, claiming they, quote, knew or should have known about Bernie's crimes.
Would you agree with Mr. Sheehan, the lawyer for the trustee, when Sheehan says you should be ashamed that you should give every penny back?
Well, obviously I disagree with many of the assertions in the lawsuit that the trustee has filed against me. And I'm hopeful that in time we'll be able to reach a settlement and I'll be able to put this behind me.
Picard says the son's trading operation received millions from Bernie's Ponzi scheme. He's suing Andrew Madoff alone for $60 million, virtually every penny he earned, borrowed, or was given to him by his father over a 10-year period.
Let me ask a really intrusive question. How much are you worth as we speak?
Well, I was fortunate over the years running the business that Marc and I ran that generated many millions of dollars in profits and enabled my brother and I both to live a comfortable lifestyle.
You haven't answered the question.
I made, in good years, several million dollars. You know, my life at this point is an open book. The details of my financial past have been laid bare completely in the lawsuit against me. I haven't enjoyed it, but that's the reality that I live in.
Do you fear ending up broke?
I think that it's a very real possibility, but I am prepared to start over again and build myself back up.
Have you talked to your dad?
I have no comment. I'm sorry, I can't help you.
But for Andrew's brother Marc, the weight of the lawsuits, attacks from the media, and the shame became unbearable.
He was absolutely obsessed with the news coverage. He would wake up every morning, immediately comb through the regular newspapers, and that would be followed up by reading blog posts and comments. And I would say, look, you got to shut off your computer. You got to stop subjecting yourself to this, because this is not helpful for you, and it's not helpful for me. And if you keep doing this, it's just going to lead to misery.
And it did. On December 11th, 2010, the second anniversary of his father's arrest, Marc Madoff hung himself, while his 2-year-old son slept in the next room. He said in his last email, "No one wants to hear the truth."
As soon as we saw the caller ID at that early hour on a Saturday morning, we both knew what had happened.
How did you react when you heard that?
It was awful. I wish I could say I was shocked, but I wasn't. He had tried to kill himself a little more than a year before, and that was absolutely devastating. And I had tried to talk to him to understand what he was going through. It was very painful for me and very difficult for me, but I was making it through. And to see him struggling and not making it was terrible. We were very close. He was my best friend, and I wanted to help him.
The night before he killed himself, there was an awful article in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, I understood I was going through those agonies of shame, and it was terrible to feel that we were always so proud of who we were and Bernie's success in the industry. It was so difficult.
She blames herself for Marc's suicide. He'd wanted her to cut off all contact with her husband.
I just wish, until my dying day, that I had done what he wanted. I don't know if it would have made a difference or not, but if I could change things, at least if I had tried, I would have felt a little better. I don't know if it would have mattered. It's the most awful thing that can happen to anybody. Suicide of a child.
After her son's death, Ruth Madoff told her husband she was finished with him. No visits, no phone calls. That decision led to a reconciliation of sorts with Andrew.
That's partly why I'm sitting right here. He and Catherine wanted to write this book. They thought it would be good if I was a part of it, and I agreed because I wanted to reconcile.
Neither Ruth nor Andrew will benefit from sales of the book. Catherine Hooper will.
You live just over there. You miss the apartment?
Not really.
She lives a simpler life now in a 3-room apartment in South Florida. But she remains Ruth Madoff, lawful wife of the greatest financial criminal in history.
Why haven't you filed for a divorce from this man?
I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. He's going to die in prison. I certainly don't want to find another man these days.
He'll probably see this interview. Are you concerned about it?
I was thinking about that. No, I'm not concerned. He should hear it.
Believe her or not, the thousands of victims may have little sympathy for Andrew and Ruth, but it can't be denied that they too are victims of Bernie Madoff.
That's Mark and Andrew.
Mm-hmm. In happier times.
They lost a son and brother and will forever carry the shame of the Madoff name.
What he did to me, to my brother, and to my family is unforgivable. What he did to thousands of other people, destroyed their lives. I'll never understand it, and I'll never forgive him for it, and I'll never speak to him again.
Michael Lewis has made a literary career finding jump-off-the-page characters and using them to help tell complicated stories. And what could be more complicated than explaining cryptocurrency? Lewis gained all hours access to Sam Bankman-Fried, known for a time as the J.P. Morgan of crypto. His sector, as ungoverned as his hair, Bankman-Fried was worth more than $20 billion before he turned 30. An unlikely celebrity, his life braided finance, politics, sports, and pop culture. Then the empire crumbled, and today Bankman-Fried sits in jail on various federal charges and faces potential sentences of more than 100 years. Lewis, though, didn't panic sell. He simply went where the story took him. His latest book, Going Infinite, comes out Tuesday, which is also the opening day in the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried. You had so much access to Sam Bankman-Fried writing this book. What ultimately is the purpose here?
I realized I had an ambition for the book. I saw it as a kind of letter to the jury. I mean, there's going to be this trial, and the lawyers are going to tell two stories. And so there's a story war going on in the courtroom, and I think neither one of those stories is as good as the story I have.
You should be willing.
Michael Lewis didn't set out to write this book. 2 autumns ago, he was at home in the Bay Area when he got a call from a friend interested in investing with a young billionaire. Could Lewis meet with this wonderkind and size him up? So it was Lewis brought Sam Bankman-Fried here in the Berkeley Hills for a hike in the park.
You gotta remember, I knew nothing about him. All I knew was I was supposed to evaluate his character, and that 18 months earlier he had nothing. Now he had $22.5 billion and was the richest person in the world under 30. He didn't care much about like spending it on yachts. He was going to spend it to save humanity from extinction, kind of thing. So the whole walk was like, my jaw was on the floor by here after I heard all that.
As an author whose stock and trade is finding interesting characters, is your story meter starting to beep about now?
I was on red alert, and I said this to him. I said, I don't know what's going to happen to you. Something's going to happen to you. Can I just come and, ride shotgun? Now, riding shotgun ended up being like hanging on for dear life to an automobile that's going 270 miles an hour and taking every hairpin turn.
My instinct was we should very slowly be trickling out these positions.
Sam Bankman-Fried and Lewis would end up meeting more than 100 times over 2 years, speaking for countless hours. As our camera rolled in July, note how Bankman-Fried shuffled cards and jackhammered his legs and avoided eye contact. Lewis considers Bankman-Fried the most challenging and fascinating character he's ever encountered. This from an author who's been writing nonfiction since the 80s.
I want to talk about that conversation.
Yeah.
The story of Sam's life is people not understanding him, misreading him. He's so different. He's so unusual. I mean, I think in a funny way that the reason I have such a compelling story is I have a character that I do come to know and that the reader comes to know that the world still doesn't know.
Some Japanese yen.
A graduate of MIT, Bankman-Fried saw the world in numbers, framing everything in his life as a probability exercise, including philanthropy. He committed to making as much money as possible, so he could give it away as efficiently as possible, guided by a social movement, effective altruism.
What it means in Sam's instance is you can go out and have a career where you do good. You can go be a doctor in Africa, or you can go out and make as much money as possible and pay people to be doctors in Africa. If you're a doctor in Africa, you end up saving a certain number of lives, but you're only one doctor. But if you can pay 40 people to become doctors in Africa, you're going to save 40 times the number of lives.
This is like a strategy game.
Well, you don't understand Sam Bankman-Fried unless you understand that he turns everything into a game.
Right.
Everything is gamified.
Bankman-Fried worked as a Wall Street trader before moving to Berkeley at age 25 to start his own trading firm, Alameda Research. Instead of buying and selling stocks or bonds, he would traffic in crypto, a digital form of currency not tied to a centralized system.
The basic idea was to be the smartest person in the crypto markets, to be the one who did the kind of trading in crypto that the smartest Wall Street traders did in stocks.
So these quant skills he had as a trader on regular stocks and equities markets, he was going to bring to this new ascending crypto world.
Correct.
What's the difference between crypto finance and traditional finance?
Well, the promise of crypto finance is the promise of an absence of intermediaries. If I want to wire you $10,000, a bank has to do it. A bank records the transaction, a bank takes some little slice of it. If I want to wire you $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, I can just hit a button and you get it. Right. So you remove the institutions.
Coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, crypto took hold as an anti-establishment, punk rock version of a financial system, which Lewis finds ironic.
In the beginning especially, it's a crowd of people who are incredibly mistrustful of institutions. What attracts them to it is they hate the government, they hate banks. But then they somehow, this pool of incredibly mistrustful people, proceed to trust each other in ways that I wouldn't trust you.
They're parking their money in a sector that's unregulated. There are no physical properties.
Provably squirrely and unreliable,
right.
Over and over.
But it's predicated on trust.
It's like they are Charlie Brown kicking the football.
Right.
That they're sure that this time Lucy's going to hold it.
Still, Bankman-Fried made a fortune at Alameda Research. And then he really got rich. Instead of simply trading, Bankman-Fried seized on the idea of opening his own cryptocurrency exchange.
One of the things he notices is that all the crypto exchanges are screwed up in one way or another. There are dozens of these places where you can trade crypto, but they're not structured for a professional trader. The technology is bad, they'll lose their customers' money. It's the Wild West. Right. He realizes that if you built a better exchange, he wanted to build an exchange he could trade on. So he creates FTX. And once he created it, it went boom. And when it went boom, he realized that, well, that's the gold mine. It actually isn't trading the crypto.
This is owning the casino,
It's owning
right?
the casino. He started as a gambler, and he realized that, building the better casino was actually going to be more valuable.
FTX has seen explosive growth.
Soon, roughly $15 billion a day in trades were executed on his new exchange, FTX.
If you're sitting in the middle of those transactions and you're taking out even a tiny fraction of a percentage point, there's a lot of money to be made.
Indifferent to the outcome of the trade.
You're taking no risk. You're taking no risk at all. It didn't matter to him whether crypto went up or crypto went down. As long as people are trading crypto, it made money. It's the best business. I had one venture capitalist tell me that several of the venture capitalists thought that Sam might be the world's first trillionaire.
Trillionaire?
They're looking for the next Google. They're looking for the next Apple. They thought FTX had that kind of possibility, that it had a chance to be the single most important financial institution in the world.
As he began accumulating billions as if they were Pokemon cards, Bankman-Fried began attracting something else he wasn't accustomed to.
There's a lot of leverage in cryptocurrency markets.
Attention.
He changed not at all. He'd never been on TV. He goes on TV in his cargo shorts and his messy hair, and he's playing video games while he's on the air.
Wait. He's playing video games on the air.
You would think your first television appearance, you might be a little uptight, a little nervous. And if you watch the clip, you can see his eyes going back and forth. This is because he's trying to win his video game at the same time he's on the air.
Whether it was his smarts, his fierce indifference to appearance, or simply his vast wealth, the beautiful people suddenly found him irresistible.
As his net worth goes up, so does his social capital. You write about a Zoom meeting you walked in on.
He says, I got to go do a Zoom. I said, what is it? And he says, there's this person named Anna Wintour, and he didn't know who she was.
You had no idea who she was?
No. So I sat off to one side where she couldn't see me, and I watched this Zoom.
Now, you're thinking, what does Anna Wintour want to do with a schlub like Sam?
Exactly. He is the worst dressed person in America. He is the worst dressed billionaire in the history of billionaires. What she wants him to do is to sponsor the Met Gala, her great ball that she throws every year, which is all about dress and appearances. Sam was a social experiment. He is person who has nothing, all of a sudden has seemingly infinite dollars, will give it away, is unbelievably open-handed about it, and doesn't ask a whole lot of questions. What that attracts, who shows up when this person exists? Everybody.
Everyone comes to the trough.
Everybody comes to the trough. Everybody wants to be his best friend.
FTX is the safest and easiest way to buy and sell crypto.
Bankman-Fried wanted it known that FTX was the go-to player in crypto.
Hey, it's Shaquille O'Neal, and I'm excited to be partnering with FTX.
He turned to the sports world to bring his exchange both legitimacy and edge. Lewis saw the FTX internal marketing documents.
He paid Tom Brady $55 million for 20 hours a year for 3 years. He paid Steph Curry $35 million for same thing for 3 years.
Pretty good hourly wage.
He spent $100 and something million buying the naming rights for the Miami Heat arena.
I don't think so.
He spent $25 million making a Super Bowl ad with Larry David.
It's FTX? I don't think so.
For which he then paid Larry David another $10 million. It's breathtaking what's on that list.
Did any of the people surrounding him, these celebrities, do it because they found him interesting, or was it all because he's worth $20-some billion?
It's probably not fair for me to speak for them, but I will speak for them. Tom Brady, I think, adored him. Really? I think Tom Brady thought he was just a really interesting person. I think he'd like to hear what he had to say.
What's up, guys? I'm here with my boy Sam from FTX.
And he really liked Tom Brady. And Sam wasn't like a big sports person, so it was funny to watch that interaction. It was like, these two people actually get along. It's like the class nerd and the quarterback.
The two high school tribes.
The nerd of all nerds. Like, even the nerds don't hang out with this nerd. He's such a nerd. The quarterback somehow likes him, and he somehow likes the quarterback.
Lewis writes in his book that Bankman-Fried's philanthropic ambitions kept pace with his wealth. Never mind doctors in Africa, he set out to confront what he saw as existential threats to all of humanity.
So Sam Bankman-Fried ends up with a portfolio heavily concentrated in two things. Pandemic prevention, because there really are things the government should be doing. And the other thing that made his list that was so interesting was Donald Trump. He took the view that all the big existential problems are going to require the United States government to be involved to solve them. And if the democracy is undermined, we don't have our democracy anymore, all these problems are less likely to be solved. And he saw Trump trying to undermine the democracy, and he thought Trump belongs on the list of existential risks.
To that end, Lewis writes that in 2022, Bankman-Fried met with the most unlikely of allies, Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
You're flying with Sam and he tells you about a meeting he's going to have with Mitch McConnell.
Well, the interesting thing starts before we even get on the plane. I meet him at the airport, and he comes tumbling out of a car, and he's in his cargo shorts and his T-shirt, and he's got balled up in his hand. It takes me a while to see what it is, but it's a blue suit. It's got more wrinkles than any blue suit ever had. It's like it's just jammed in this little ball. And a shoe falls out of the pile that he's got in his arms. And I say, why do you have the suit? He says, Mitch McConnell really cares what you wear when you meet with him. And he's having dinner in 6 hours with Mitch McConnell. And I said, well, you got the suit. You got a belt? He goes, no, I don't have a belt. I said, you have a shirt? He goes, no shirt. And the suit, you really can't wear that suit. And he goes, yeah, but they told me to bring a suit.
According to Lewis, Bankman-Fried wanted to help McConnell fund Republican candidates at odds with Donald Trump.
What is the subtext of this dinner is Sam is going to write tens of millions of dollars of checks to a super PAC that Mitch McConnell is then going to use to get elected people who are not hostile to democracy.
Wait, so Mitch McConnell has a list of Republican candidates who are sort of on the playing field for democracy versus what he deemed outside.
He and his people had done the work to distinguish between actual deep Trumpers and people who were just seeming to approve of Donald Trump, but were actually willing to govern.
Bankman-Fried ended up giving multi-millions in support of Republican candidates. Back in 2020, Bankman-Fried had ranked among Joe Biden's biggest donors. As 2024 approached, he planned on spending more, albeit in the most unconventional way.
One of the most shocking passages in this book, I thought, came with this revelation that Sam had looked into paying Donald Trump not to run.
That only shocks you if you don't know Sam. Sam's thinking we could pay Donald Trump not to run for president. like how much would it take?
Did he get an answer?
So he did get an answer. He was floated, there was a number that was kicking around, and the number that was kicking around when I was talking to Sam about this was $5 billion. Sam was not sure that number came directly from Trump.
Wait. So Sam's looking into paying Trump not to run, and he actually might not have come from Trump himself, but he actually got a price?
He got one answer, yes. The question Sam had was not just is $5 billion enough to pay Trump not to run, but was it legal?
Well, why didn't this happen? Why didn't he follow through?
Well, they were still having these conversations when FTX blew up. So why it didn't happen? He didn't have $5 billion anymore.
Approached for comment by 60 Minutes, neither former President Trump nor Senator McConnell responded. Last November, in a matter of days, mega billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried lost virtually everything, and he soon faced an onslaught of federal fraud charges. When we return, the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried. Meteoric as the rise of Sam Bankman-Fried was, the fall came faster still. In a span of days, a celebrity multi-billionaire became a pariah. His wealth largely evaporated as federal prosecutors mounted a case against him. In his new book out this week, Michael Lewis details the crash and leaves it to readers to decide if Sam Bankman-Fried was a cryptocurrency conman in cargo shorts or a really smart guy singularly ill-equipped to run and manage a business.
By spring of 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried had planted his flag in the Bahamas. He decided to move his high-flying cryptocurrency exchange, FTX, to the islands. Not for the beaches, but for the friendly regulatory climate. With the Prime Minister on hand, they put shovels in the ground for a new headquarters. Bankman-Fried openly discussed paying off the country's $9 billion national debt. By this point, Michael Lewis and Bankman-Fried had a dynamic that went beyond author-subject.
And he started using me as a sounding board.
For what?
For just like decisions he was making. Should I join Elon Musk in buying Twitter? You know, should we do this? Should we do that?
What'd you tell him?
Mostly my answers were no, no, and no. And he would look at me and say, you're a boring grown-up.
And Bankman-Fried, now 31, told Lewis, now 62, that anyone older than 45 was useless. But Lewis noted that if ever there were a corporate leader in need of adult input to manage 400 employees, it was Sam Bankman-Fried.
What kind of a manager was he?
Horrible. I mean, even his best friends inside the company said Sam is just not built to manage people.
Had Sam managed anything before?
His sole experience of leadership was running puzzle hunts for math nerds at high school, and actually thought deep down, if you asked him, people shouldn't need to be managed. So he proceeded to act on that and basically didn't manage them.
Is there any checks and balances happening in this environment then?
Well, what checks and balances would you imagine there might be in a corporation?
Chief financial officer?
No, there's no chief financial officer.
HR department?
No, there was no HR department.
Compliance office?
No. There was no board of directors. Or rather, I asked Sam, I said, who's your board of directors? And he said, we don't really have one. I said, what do you mean you don't have one? Everyone has one. He says, there are two other people on something called a board of directors, but it's changed and I don't even know their names. And their job is just to DocuSign.
He didn't know the name of the board of directors?
No, he didn't know who was on it.
So he's running this like a lemonade stand, and he's doing enough volume of business. This could be a public traded company if he wanted to.
Oh, no, if it was a publicly traded company, it would be a publicly traded company worth $40 billion. No, it was all Sam's world. And there was nobody there to say, like, don't do that.
FTX purchased a $30 million executive penthouse in a Bahamas resort, flush with an exclusive marina. It was lost on Sam, who worked feverishly in the office and slept on a beanbag chair. But there was another reason he avoided the Lux penthouse. His girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, a former Wall Street trader herself, had kicked him out. Compounding matters, he had put her in charge of running Alameda Research, Bankman-Fried's privately held trading firm.
So the romance between Sam and Caroline goes sideways. How does that impact what happens to FTX and Alameda Research?
Coincidentally, the romance more than goes sideways. They have a falling out where they're basically not speaking to each other. She's not speaking to him at precisely the time crypto collapses.
Explain why that's a problem.
It's a problem because Alameda Research is one of the traders on FTX.
Translation, Though Bankman-Fried owned the FTX exchange, he was also trading crypto on FTX through his other business, Alameda Research.
And he was gambling in his own casino. And it created conflicts of interest.
So he owns the casino, but he's still gambling.
Yes, he didn't stop gambling.
Crypto is destabilized.
The value of crypto had been eroding throughout the summer of 2022. Then came a 1-2 punch, a leak of Alameda's unflattering balance sheet in early November. And days later, Changpeng Zhao, head of a rival exchange, took to Twitter to question FTX's viability. This triggered a classic panic run, digital style, on FTX.
How fast was money flowing out of FTX?
In the run, $1 billion a day was leaving. And
$1 billion a day, this thing's gushing.
yeah, it unravels because the depositors at FTX want their money back, and it's not all there.
It wasn't all there in large part because the investors' money intended for FTX had wound up in Bankman-Fried's privately held fund, Alameda Research, more than $8 billion.
Do you think he knowingly stole customers' money, Sam?
Put that way, no. So there's another side of this. In the very beginning, if you were a crypto trader who wanted to trade on FTX and wanted to send dollars or yen or euros onto the exchange so you could buy crypto, FTX couldn't get bank accounts. So Alameda Research, which could get bank accounts, created bank accounts for people to send money into so that it would go to FTX. But it was held in Alameda Research bank accounts. And $8 billion something piles up inside of Alameda Research that belongs to FTX customers that never gets moved.
It never gets transferred over.
Never gets transferred.
That sounds like a problem.
It's a huge problem.
What's the toughest question you think Sam's going to have to answer?
How do you not know that $8 billion that's not yours is in your private fund? I mean, really, how do you not know? Explain. $8 billion is in your private fund that belongs to other people, and you're saying you didn't know. Please explain how that's possible.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did.
What did he say?
He said you have to understand that when it went in there, it was a rounding error, that I felt like we had infinity dollars in there, that I wasn't even thinking about it.
I could see people watching this saying, like, come on, guys, this is Elizabeth Holmes in cargo shorts.
Right.
And this is all a ruse. Don't fall for the shtick. This is a bad actor.
It is a little different, supplying phony medical information to people that might kill them. And in this case, what you're doing is possibly losing some money that belonged to crypto speculators in the Bahamas. On the other hand, this is not to excuse. He shouldn't have done that.
Early in the morning of November 11th, Sam Bankman-Fried reluctantly docu-signed FTX into bankruptcy. It had taken 5 days for FTX to implode.
You go back to the Bahamas as Pompeii is falling. What did you see when you landed?
I got back the day on the Friday of the collapse. It was the afternoon that Sam had signed the bankruptcy papers. And by then, there'd been a mass exodus. Most of the employees had fled, and fled in such a way that, kind of in a ridiculous way. They'd taken the company cars and ditched them at the airport with the keys inside. Or they were going to
get the hell out of
Nobody knew what had happened, but they were just scared that they were going to be detained by the local authorities. We drove into the lot, and Sam Bankman-Fried is walking loops around the parking lot. He'd been brought over there earlier to be interviewed by Bahamas authorities, and nobody had given him a ride home, and he was just sitting there all alone.
How do you divorce Michael Lewis, the empathetic human being, from Michael Lewis, the journalist and author who recognizes what a third act this is? Pretty dramatic, right?
If I were a better person, I would have been deeply distressed by all of this. It took about a nanosecond before I thought, oh my God, this is an incredible story.
A month later, Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas and extradited to New York to face federal charges that he had fraudulently used customer deposits to finance billions of dollars of venture capital investments, real estate purchases, and political donations.
What's your response to someone who hears this and says, it's a fun story and it's crypto in the Bahamas, but this is the oldest architecture of a financial collapse that's been going on for centuries?
This isn't a Ponzi scheme. Like when you think of a Ponzi scheme, I don't know, Bernie Madoff. The problem is there's no real business there. The dollar coming in is being used to pay the dollar going out. And in this case, they actually had a great real business. If no one had ever cast aspersions on the business, if there hadn't been a run on customer deposits, they'd still be sitting there making tons of money.
Inside the Beltway, in the Hollywood Hills, and in sports arenas, suddenly, if predictably, it was Sam Bankman who?
He becomes toxic. Like, nobody wants to talk to him. He has no friends. You watch everybody who rushed in rush out.
How did Tom Brady react to this?
The first reaction was it was sadness. I clearly really liked him, and he really liked the hope that he brought. I mean, a lot of people wanted there to be a Sam. You know, there is still a Sam Bankman-Fried shaped hole in the world that now needs filling. Like, that character would be very useful.
What he represented.
What he wanted to do with the resources. And Brady was, I think, crushed, and I think as time has gone by and he ceased to get a really good explanation about what's happened, I think he's just like, he tricked me, I'm angry, I don't want to have anything to do with it anymore.
Starting in December, Lewis began driving the 45 miles from Berkeley to Stanford, where Bankman-Fried was living with his parents, who have also been ensnared in legal proceedings tied to FTX. Out on bail, but wearing an ankle monitor, he left the door open for Lewis so they could continue their conversations. We anticipated speaking with Bankman-Fried in August, but the judge in his case instituted a gag order and then put him in a Brooklyn jail for violating terms of his release. Bankman-Fried has pled not guilty.
He genuinely thinks he's innocent. I can tell you his state of mind 4 or 5 months ago. It's like, if you offered me plead guilty and do 6 months of house arrest, I'd still say no.
What do you suspect his biggest fear is if he has to go to prison?
Not having the internet. Now, that sounds crazy, but I do think that if he had the internet, he could survive jail forever. Without having a constant stream of information to react to, I think he may go mad. If you gave Sam Bankman-Fried a choice, this is quite serious, of living in a $39 million penthouse in the Bahamas without the internet, or the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn with the internet, there's no question in my mind he'd take the jail.
Michael Lewis has never before written something that dovetails so dramatically with a sensationalized news event. Lewis's book, Going Infinite, comes out Tuesday, the same day Sam Bankman-Fried's trial begins.
He made a mockery of crypto in the eyes of many. He was sort of taking away the credibility of effective altruism. How do you see him?
Everything you say is just true, and it's more interesting than that. Every cause he sought to serve, he damaged. Every cause he sought to fight, he helped. He was a person who set out in life to maximize the consequences of his actions, never mind the intent. And he had exactly the opposite effects of the ones he set out to have. So it looks to me like his life is a cruel joke.
If it hadn't been for Bernie Madoff, the most famous white-collar criminal in America right now would probably be Marc Dreier. If that name's not ringing a bell, it's because Dreier's $400 million Ponzi scheme was blown off the front pages by Madoff's arrest just a few days later. But the case is no less fascinating. The highly respected attorney who ran a big Park Avenue law firm was initially arrested in Toronto for impersonating an officer in a pension fund, in what's been described as perhaps the most bizarre arrest in the history of white-collar crime. But unlike Bernie Madoff, Marc Dreier agreed to talk to Vanity Fair magazine and to 60 Minutes in his only television interview.
I thought if somebody would ever interview me in a program such as yours, it would be for something good I've done, not something humiliating I've done.
This isn't the way you wanted to be on 60 Minutes.
No.
Nor was this the way that Marc Dreier wanted to make his final appearance in federal court as a defendant in his own fraud case. When we first interviewed him last spring, he was a prisoner in his own penthouse with a GPS monitoring device on his ankle, detained by private jailers whose $70,000 a month fee was being paid for by Dreier's 88-year-old mother. With his assets frozen or confiscated by the court, all that remained of Dreier's $40 million art collection were the hooks on the wall.
How did you end up becoming a crook?
I can't remember the moment in which I decided to do something that I knew was wrong. I had an ambition that I needed to feed. I think I fell into the trap of wanting to be more successful than I was.
But you were successful.
I was, but I really wanted to distinguish myself. I wanted to I wanted to be as important as I thought I deserved to be.
With degrees from Yale and Harvard Law and the ego of a successful trial lawyer, Dreier told friends he was going to become a billionaire. He started his own law firm that he said would revolutionize the business of law. He was going to hire the best attorneys, pay them top dollar, and keep all the profits for himself as the firm's only partner.
The idea for the law firm was very viable, but it needed much more money to get it off the ground than I anticipated, much more. So that wasn't very well thought out. I had a good idea, but a very bad business plan.
And the plan was about to get much worse. With his law firm a money pit and Dreier tapped out, he began approaching hedge funds with a cockamamie scheme he thought might save his dream. Dreier told the hedge funds that he was representing a billionaire real estate developer who was looking to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to embark on some new projects. The developer, Dreier said, would issue short-term promissory notes guaranteeing interest rates of between 7 and 12%, well above market rates, and it seemed like a very good deal. The only problem was that the real estate mogul who was supposed to be borrowing all this money, Sheldon Solo, didn't know anything about it, nor did he know that Dreier, his former lawyer, was fabricating financial information about his company and keeping the loan proceeds for himself. So you convinced hedge funds to lend money ostensibly to Mr. Solo, your former client, and in fact the money was going to you?
Yes.
So you came up with phony financial statements, phony audits, forged documents for Mr. Solo's company?
Yes.
How'd you do all that? How'd you get that stuff?
Well, I invented it.
You invented it. I mean, stationery?
Yes.
From the audit firms? How did you get that?
I was able to obtain their letterhead from either from correspondence that I had received for them or perhaps from the internet, I don't recall.
What was your biggest deal?
$100 million.
Somebody just gave you $100 million and never bothered to check with your supposed alleged client to make sure that this was on the up and up?
Right. But I don't know, I guess I heard a long time ago, too, that the more money you look for, the fewer questions people ask sometimes.
The obvious flaw in Dreier's scheme was that he would eventually have to pay off all the promissory notes plus interest if he wanted to stay out of jail. And in the end, the only way he could do it was by selling more notes to new investors. So you were digging yourself into a hole?
Very much so. You start with something that you think is manageable and small. You know it's wrong, but you think you can fix it, and you can't get out of it. It became quicksand. I had to keep meeting obligations that grew bigger and bigger. Clearly, all along the way, if there was a way for me to have gotten out of it, I would have done it.
Dreier says he used most of the $400 million he stole to expand his law firm and to finance a lifestyle designed to create the illusion that he already was a billionaire. There was the $11 million oceanfront compound in the Hamptons, an art collection that included a Picasso, 3 Matisses, and 12 Warhols, and then there was the 120-foot yacht Seascape with a full-time crew of 10, all mortgaged to the hilt. How much did you pay for the yacht?
$18 million.
And for this apartment?
$10.5 million.
You enjoyed the good life?
I did. It was clear to me that the more you showed people you didn't need money, the easier it was to attract money. So having the trappings of success was a very important part of the plan.
To raise his profile, Dreier co-hosted annual charity events with former New York Giants star Michael Strahan that attracted top-name performers like Diana Ross, John Bon Jovi, and Alicia Keys. And then there were the extravagant office parties where Dreier himself sometimes performed.
In this town, you have to really be something. You don't succeed quietly in this town, perhaps. And I think I succumbed to that.
By 2007, Dreier LLP occupied 10 floors of a Park Avenue building, employed more than 250 lawyers around the country, with high-profile clients like Bill Cosby, Andy Pettit, Maria Sharapova, and Justin Timberlake. What no one but Marc Dreier knew was that the rents, the salaries, and the expenses were all being subsidized by fraud.
I recognized in the last couple of years that what I saw as a $20 million mistake had grown into a mistake of a few $100 million. And then I did some increasingly irrational things because I wasn't thinking clearly.
Crazy things.
Yeah.
Desperate.
Yeah.
Last fall, as the financial crisis set in, Dreier was holding hundreds of millions of dollars in loans that were about to come due, and everyone wanted their money back. When Dreier was a month late on a $100 million loan payment, the hedge fund that was owed the money demanded a face-to-face meeting with executives at Sheldon Solo's real estate operations here at his office building in New York. With reality closing in, Dreier enlisted the services of a former client, Kosta Kovachev, to impersonate the president of Solo's operation. Then he commandeered a conference room in Solo's office for a meeting with a hedge fund in hopes of getting a loan extension.
And you conduct this whole charade right there in the middle of Solo's business?
Yeah.
Did you think you were going to get away with that?
Yeah.
You did, actually, didn't you?
Yeah.
Were you nervous?
I should have been nervous, but I don't know. I wasn't very nervous.
I don't get the sense that you're a very emotional person.
I think I am. I didn't plan anything I was going to say in this interview other than not to lose my emotions. But it's not going to do me any good to literally cry over it.
When I ask you about the emotion, I mean, here you are, walking into a former client's office, perpetuating this scheme right in his office.
That's called chutzpah. That's not emotion, you know. I mean, do I have chutzpah? Yes. Can I be very tough under pressure? Yes. So was I able to go into Mr. Solo's office and pull off that charade without falling apart? Yes. Did I think I could do that? Yes, because I had done things that required nerves of steel before. But it doesn't mean that I'm not emotional about what I did. I clearly remember when I left that office thinking I had done something really crazy and foolish.
It was bizarre. I mean, he was impervious to the idea of being caught.
Attorney Gerald Shargell, who would represent Dreier during his legal proceedings and plea negotiations with the U.S. government, said the facts of the case were beyond the reach of a soundbite.
He was a solid lawyer, and there are a number of judges who told me that Marc Dreier was probably the best lawyer that has ever appeared in front of him. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, it's like something went off the tracks.
Do you have any idea what it was?
You know, he was fighting his own demons. In his own mind, he hadn't achieved what he was expected to achieve. And he wanted to just grab for it, but he grabbed for it in a profoundly sick way.
By December of last year, both investors and investigators had grown suspicious of Dreier, and his luck would eventually run out in Toronto, where he pretended to be a lawyer for a teacher's pension fund in order to swindle a hedge fund out of $33 million.
That was the first act I'd done where I knew I was going to get caught and just couldn't help myself. I just wasn't thinking clearly.
Dreier had collected a business card from the lawyer he was claiming to be, but the man he was supposed to meet with sensed that there was something wrong.
What made him suspicious, do you think?
You know, he had acted diligently, and he made some phone calls which I think led him to be suspicious. I knew as soon as he walked in that he was suspicious. But I still did it.
The police in Toronto were called, and Dreier was arrested for impersonation. When he returned to New York 5 days later, he was apprehended by the FBI on charges of fraud and money laundering, to the complete and utter astonishment of the New York legal community and to the employees of his own law firm.
When we heard the news, we thought it was a joke at first.
There were 10 floors of attorneys and boxes, but a lot of people started to resign immediately. They just walked out the door.
Okay, next up. These are the black Poltrona Frau leather bucket-style chairs.
10 days after Dreier's arrest, the law firm bearing his name had declared bankruptcy, and 600 people were looking for work. The day we met attorney Joanne Rapuano and longtime office manager Tori Lalonde, the firm's furniture and office equipment were being sold off by the court to pay off the creditors, mostly hedge funds and their investors, who were not likely to see much of the missing $400 million.
Okay, now we have the paper shredder. If this paper shredder could talk. How much of the paper shredder? $25 bid, open it up now.
What's it like being here?
Truly tragic. You know, you watch something get built, you think you're part of something on its way up, then all of a sudden you see it being carted out the front door.
1,000 opens it up. $1,000 bid to open it up.
It's just disgraceful. We are victims. I have no job. I have no medical. After today, I'm done. So now what do? Start my career all over?
I don't want to compare you with Madoff, but one of the questions that people ask about Madoff constantly is how could he do this? How could he walk around living this life, spending all this money, never showing a crack in the facade. And there's some similarities, but how did you deal with that?
I was doing a lot of things at the same time. I was engaged in a fraud, which took a lot of energy to sustain. But I was also running a law firm, a legitimate law firm, other than obviously the obvious fact that it was funded illegitimately. I was a practicing lawyer. I was handling my own cases in court, which took a lot of energy. I almost didn't have enough time to dwell on the elephant in the room, which was the very, the crime I was engaging with to keep all this up.
He has plenty of time to dwell on it now. After entering his guilty plea, Marc Dreier has begun serving his 20-year prison sentence in Illinois. He wanted everyone he hurt to know that he was profoundly sorry. And for someone so obsessed with his own image and what people thought about him, his punishment is just beginning.
I've lost everything I own. I've lost my business. I've obviously lost my reputation. I've caused my family, obviously, enormous unhappiness. And I have nothing.
Do you have any friends?
Now?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem so.
There have been lots of stories over the past few months on identity theft and how the information can be used against you. You may have heard something about stolen identity tax fraud. You may even have been a victim of it. It's the biggest tax scam around right now. As we first reported in September, this is how it works. Someone steals your identity, files a bogus tax return in your name before you do, and collects a refund from the IRS. It's so simple you would think it would never work. But it does. It's been around since 2008. You'd think the IRS would have come up with a way to stop it. It hasn't. Instead, the scam's gone viral, tripling in the last 3 years. The government says it's affecting millions of Americans and costing taxpayers billions of dollars every year, proving once again what every good con man already knows. There is no underestimating the general dysfunction and incompetence of government bureaucracy.
Tsunami of fraud that we have been encountering. The vast number of fraudulent tax returns was something that I don't think the IRS ever really was ready for.
Wilfredo Ferrer is the United States Attorney for Southern Florida, and George Pirro, the agent in charge of the Miami field office of the FBI. Together, they run a federal task force operating at the epicenter of the largest tax scam in the country.
Florida has been third year in a row on the top, #1, in terms of ID theft complaints. And Miami is also #1 in terms of metropolitan areas that suffer from identity fraud.
Don't take this the wrong way. Is there any scheme that Miami is not #1 at?
We have very sophisticated and good criminals, Steve, who know how to defeat the system.
For decades now, South Florida has been the Silicon Valley for scam artists, drawn here by the weather, the beaches, and the opportunity to make lots of money without actually doing much work. There's Medicare fraud, mortgage fraud, securities fraud, and now what the Justice Department calls stolen identity tax refund fraud, a tax preparation scheme epitomized by an overabundance of questionable-looking establishments that have sprung up here over the past few years. But this scam is so easy you don't even need an office.
For this fraud, all you need is a laptop, someone's social security number, date of birth, not even their name. They can do it from their kitchen table, they can do it at a fast food chain restaurant, or they can do it on the beach as long as they have Wi-Fi access.
Actually, Corey Williams says you don't even need a laptop. You can file phony returns on your cell phone if you have the right app. He used to be a legitimate tax preparer until his boss turned him onto the scam. Before he was arrested and sentenced to 40 months in prison, he'd made millions and millions of dollars.
Anybody who knew about it, you'd be a fool to not try to get involved with making some money. I could wake up in the comfort of my own home and just get on a laptop, do about 15 returns a day, 15 times $3,000 a return, that's $45,000 a day.
So you had a home office?
Yeah, I used to work I would work in my boxes and the t-shirt. Yeah.
It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Williams gave us a demonstration. 1, you collect or buy a list of stolen identities that are readily available in Miami if you know the right people. 2, you go to one of dozens of tax preparation sites online, and using the stolen Social Security numbers and dates of birth, you fill out a completely bogus W-2 form claiming a modest refund of a few $1,000s.
It has given us a refund of $4,834.
3, you tell the IRS if you want the refund mailed to your house, wired to your bank account, or loaded onto a prepaid debit card.
You have any idea how many bogus returns you filled out?
It has to be like in the thousands.
Did the IRS pay all of them?
On a percentage range, you'd say they would pay out 40% of the tax returns.
Once you hit the send button, how long did it take you to get a check?
7 days.
7 days?
Yes.
So you'd send in these returns, and 7 days later, you'd get a check?
Yes.
40% of the time?
40% of the time.
Where would you have them send the check?
You could send the checks to an address, any address. I've seen cases where 25 checks came to one address, and the mailman delivered it.
It sounded so outrageous, we wanted to run it by the federal task force.
So you just put down a name and a Social Security number, and you could make up an employer or the amount of money that was earned and withheld, and send it off to the IRS, and they'll send you a check back for the refund?
They will pay most of the time unless they catch that there's some fraudulent, information, and then it's our job to chase.
I'm still amazed that you don't need to provide any documentation when you file your tax return.
There are no supporting documents when you're filing electronically. And that's the ease or the convenience that was created for the benefit of the innocent taxpayer, which is now being exploited by criminals.
You would think that the IRS computers would notice that they were sending thousands of checks to a handful of addresses, but they didn't. And you might expect that the IRS would match taxpayer returns with legitimate W-2 forms filed by employers. It doesn't do that either, because the law requires refund checks to be sent out within 6 weeks, and employer W-2s are often not available until months later. So if a bogus return is received before a legitimate one, the check will go out to the crooks.
The way that you learn that you become a victim of this is when you go in and try to file your return and the IRS tells you, oh, you've already filed. You're like, no, I haven't. Oh, like, yes, you have. Well, it wasn't you, it was the fraudster who used your identity to file the return.
And it's not an easy problem to get fixed. Many of the people in this line outside the IRS office in Plantation, Florida, are victims of the fraud, waiting to prove their identity and claim their rightful refund. They will eventually be reimbursed, but it can involve massive amounts of paperwork, multiple visits to the office, and months of waiting.
Did you know about this before you got this job?
I had no idea about this before I started getting briefed last fall.
John Koskinen is the commissioner of the IRS, its fourth commissioner in just 2 years. It's become a high turnover position in part because the agency has been beset by a number of embarrassing problems, including stolen identity tax fraud, that have led people to question its competency.
I mean, it looks to me like the IRS got really outsmarted by some people who were not all that bright or not all that ingenious.
What happened was a lot of people discovered that A, Social Security numbers are either easy to steal or find or buy, and then B, you could file a false return.
Why didn't anybody anticipate that?
Well, I think it goes back to the fact that people didn't anticipate Social Security numbers were going to be so readily available. The assumption was, until very recently, that a Social Security number was a part of your identity that you protected and took great care of. So that no one actually ever expected that those would be easy to get a hold of.
But there were plenty of warnings. The Senate Finance Committee held hearings on stolen identity refund fraud way back in 2009, when then IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman testified.
I discussed the issue of identity theft with the senior leaders at the IRS my first day on the job.
There were more hearings in 2011 and another in 2012 with Deputy IRS Commissioner Steve Miller.
We cannot stop all identity theft. However, we are better than we were, and we will get better still.
In those ensuing years, the number of cases of stolen identity refund fraud have risen from 51,000 to nearly 3 million.
in the year 2012, the Department of Treasury's Inspector General predicted that by the year 2016, IRS will be hemorrhaging and losing $21 billion due to this type of fraud.
It's only 2014. Don't you think something can be done in the next 2 years to fix this?
Well, that is my hope.
But it will not be easy. The entire IRS system uses Social Security numbers as its primary means of identifying taxpayers, even though they're now ubiquitous in public, private, and corporate files, just waiting to be stolen by thieves.
The key to this is to have somebody in the inside or someone who has access to our Social Security numbers, to our date of birth, and a lot of these individuals are insiders in big institutions, in banks, hospitals, schools, clinics.
We would approach anyone who worked at like a dental office, anybody who worked in the medical field. You would just approach them, you tell them if they get you 100 names, you would give them $1,000.
These people easy to find in Miami?
Very easy, very easy.
As you would think, if you went in and started knocking doors and asking people that worked at hospitals and doctors' offices and dentists' offices, somebody would call the cops.
No, they needed the money more than they wanted to call the cops. Everybody was with it. Everybody was with the scam.
Was this like a community of people doing this?
More like a nation of people doing this.
It's gone from hundreds of people filing hundreds of fraudulent returns to thousands of people filing millions of fraudulent returns, and it's become much more organized. U.S. Attorney Ferrer says some people are even setting up franchises.
We have had defendants, masterminds of these schemes, engage in filing parties. And what they do is that they invite their friends to a hotel room or to an apartment, and then they tell them how to do it in return for a cut of these tax returns.
You make it sound like Amway or Tupperware.
That's what we've seen.
Even Ferrer's old boss, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, had his identity stolen in an IRS refund scam. And a number of members of the task force have also been victimized, including North Miami Beach police officer Rocky Festa, who says local police departments have been hit hard.
Aventura had nearly the entire department, which was 50-some-odd officers got hit. Davie Fire and Davie Police, it was in the hundreds. They were all victims of tax return fraud.
Festa and his partner, Craig Caitlin, now work exclusively on tax refund cases and were among the first to discover the breadth of the scam 5 years ago when they began finding tax documents and stacks of prepaid debit cards when they pulled over suspicious vehicles.
Here's a wire plastic with the card.
You can get one of these prepaid debit cards almost anywhere, usually without providing identification. You then deposit and withdraw money from it as needed. It's like a bank account for people who don't have one.
Now, is that a real Visa card?
It's a real Visa card. And you can
you can go into a convenience store and buy a Visa card?
Right off the shelf.
If you want, the IRS will electronically deposit tax refunds directly onto these cards, no questions asked, eliminating the need for crooks to ever actually set foot inside a bank or to try and cash a refund check. They can spend the money in stores or withdraw it from ATMs.
So is this kind of like a throwaway phone?
Yes, sir. Yeah, once the money goes on the card, you empty the money off on ATMs and you put the card in the garbage. It's pretty good.
The prepaid cards are now used by millions of Americans to collect $142 billion in government entitlements, like Social Security and Medicare payments. IRS Commissioner Koskinen thinks it's an invitation to commit fraud.
The prepaid cards are the currency of criminals. Our problem is you can't distinguish the number of a prepaid card from a legitimate bank account.
Almost impossible to trace, right?
It is almost impossible to trace.
Why doesn't somebody put an end to that?
There are a significant percentage of the population unbanked, as it were called. Because if you don't allow them to use a prepaid card, they're going to have to get a check and they'll have to pay somebody a lot of money to cash that check. So you're disadvantaging a significant part of the population.
And empowering a criminal network.
And you're empowering a criminal network.
5 years into the scam, the IRS can still not always tell if the person filing the return and claiming the refund is actually the real taxpayer. By comparison, the credit card companies are much better at flagging suspicious charges before they're paid out.
Credit card companies don't have that much of a problem with this. Why can't the IRS do that?
So that's the direction in which we're going. It's a significant move into what I call the 21st century. We're still kind of in the late 1900s, but this is still a big problem that while we're making great progress, we've got a lot of work to do.
And they're having trouble keeping up with the con artists. Last month, the IRS announced that hackers had busted into its computer system and stolen another 104,000 taxpayer identities, which so far have been used to collect nearly $50 million in bogus refunds. As for Corey Williams, he's now in jail, serving his 40-month sentence. Of all the problems facing the United States right now, none are more important than health care. President Obama says rising costs are driving huge federal budget deficits that imperil our future, and that there is enough waste and fraud in the system to pay for health care reform if it was eliminated. At the center of both issues is Medicare, the government insurance program that provides health care to 46 million elderly and disabled Americans. But it also provides a rich and steady income stream for criminals who are constantly finding new ways to steal a sizable chunk of the $500 billion that are paid out each year in Medicare benefits. In fact, Medicare fraud, estimated now to total about $60 billion a year, has become one of, if not the most profitable crimes in America. We caution you that this story may raise your blood pressure, along with some troubling questions about our government's ability to manage a medical bureaucracy. If you want to find Medicare fraud, the first place you should look is South Florida, where we were told it has pushed aside cocaine as the major criminal enterprise here. It's a quiet crime, no sirens or gunfire. The only victims are the American taxpayers, and they don't even know they're being ripped off. FBI Special Agent Brian Waterman, who we rode with for several days, told us the only visible evidence of the crimes are the thousands of tiny clinics and pharmacies that dot the low-rent strip malls. You don't even know they're there because there's never anyone inside. No doctors, no nurses, and no patients.
This office number should be manned and answered 24 hours a day.
This tiny medical supply company billed Medicare almost $2 million in July and $500,000 while we were there in August. But we never found anybody in, and our phone calls were never returned.
Say they're currently on the other line.
Oh. Well, do they want you to hold?
Sometimes they don't even have offices. We went looking for a pharmacy at 7511 Northwest 73rd Street that billed Medicare $300,000 in charges. It turned out to be in the middle of a public warehouse storage area.
They've already told us that there's no offices here, there are no businesses here. In fact, they're not even allowed to have a business here.
Waterman is the senior agent in the Miami office in charge of Medicare fraud. And Kirk Ogrofsky, a top Justice Department prosecutor, oversees half a dozen Medicare fraud strike forces that have been set up across the country. This one operates out of a warehouse at a secret location in South Florida and includes investigators from the FBI, Health and Human Services, and the IRS.
There's a healthcare fraud industry where people do nothing but recruit patients, get patient lists, find doctors, look on the internet, find different scams. There are entire groups and entire organizations of people that are dedicated to nothing but committing fraud, finding a better way to steal from Medicare.
Is the Medicare fraud business bigger than the drug business in Miami now?
I think it's way bigger.
What changed?
The criminals changed.
Sophistication.
They figured out that rather than stealing $100,000 or $200,000, they can steal $100 million. We've seen cases in the last 6-8 months that involve a couple of guys that, if they weren't stealing from Medicare, might be stealing your car.
You know, we were the king of the drugs in the 80s, we're king of healthcare fraud in the 90s and the 2000s.
But it's not just Miami. In March, the FBI arrested 53 people in Detroit, including a number of doctors, and charged them with billing Medicare more than $50 million for unnecessary medical procedures. And in Los Angeles, the City of Angels Medical Center recruited homeless people off the street to fill their empty beds, offering them cash and drugs plus clean sheets and 3 squares a day, while billing Medicare tens of millions of dollars for their stay.
We have to understand this is a major fraud area.
United States Attorney General Eric Holder has taken a crime that's been in the backwaters of law enforcement and made it a top priority at the Justice Department.
Why do you think it's been so attractive for the criminals?
Because I think it's been pretty easy. I think that they have found a way in which they've been able to get pretty substantial amounts of money with not a huge amount of effort, and at least until now, without the possibility of great detection.
With much fewer risks.
Much fewer risks. You'll see some of these people and they'll say, there's not a chance that you're going to have some other drug dealer shooting at you. The chances of being incarcerated were lower. The amount of time that you would spend in jail was smaller, all of which is different now.
You're waking up every day making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 every day, almost literally. And you're like, wow, I just won the lottery.
Let's call this guy Tony. That's not his real name and obviously not his real face. But before he was ratted out by a friend and brought down by the FBI, he was making Wall Street money running a string of phony medical supply companies out of this building. They were theoretically providing wheelchairs and other expensive equipment to Medicare patients.
How much money did you steal from Medicare?
About $20 million.
20 million?
Yes.
Was it easy?
Real easy.
And you're not exactly a criminal mastermind.
No, not really. It's more like common sense. That's all you need here.
Did you actually ever sell any medical equipment?
No. Just have somebody in an office answering the phone like if we're open for business, and wake up in the morning, check your bank account and see how much money you made today.
You didn't have any medical equipment. You didn't really have any clients either, did you?
No.
All of it was fake?
All of it was fake, yes.
And you would just fill out some invoices and some forms and send them to Medicare?
Yeah, that's it. And 15 to 30 days, you'll have a direct deposit in your bank account. It was ridiculous. It's more like taking candy from a baby.
According to the FBI, all you have to do to get into this business is rent a cheap storefront office, find or create a front man to get an occupational license, bribe a doctor or forge a prescription pad, and obtain the names and ID numbers of legitimate Medicare patients you can bill the phony charges to.
There's a whole industry of people out there that do nothing but provide patients.
When you say provide patients, what do you mean?
I'm just talking about lists of patients, people's names, social security numbers, addresses, and date of birth. With those 4 things, you can bill for a patient.
In order for Medicare to pay, you need to have a Medicare patient. Where do you get those?
There'll be people that sell you a list of maybe $10 per patient, and I'll buy 1,000, 10,000 maybe at a time. And then you just fill in that patient's name, and you send it. And then I'll use the same patients with the same company. Then the next company, I use the same patients and keep using them. And they'll pay for the same patient every time.
Once the crooked companies get hold of the patient lists, usually stolen from doctors' offices or hospitals, they begin running up all sorts of outlandish charges and submit them to Medicare for payment, knowing full well that the agency is required by law to pay the claims within 15 to 30 days, and that it only has enough auditors to check a tiny fraction of the charges to see if they're legitimate. If they're not, it's usually people like 76-year-old Clara Mahoney who catch them. She began to notice all sorts of crazy things turning up on her quarterly Medicare statements back in 2003, things that Medicare paid for on her behalf and that she never ordered, never wanted, and never received.
What kind of things?
Oh, air mattresses, a wheelchair, urine bag for my leg. Was getting so I didn't want to open up the explanation of benefits because is like, oh no, not again.
Mahoney, who says she hasn't been sick in 30 years, began calling Medicare to tell them that someone was ripping them off. But the only responses she received were letters saying that someone was looking into it. The bogus charges are still turning up on her statements.
And I continued to report, and I kept saying, can't you flag my account? I'm not getting any equipment or supplies, nothing.
So how many years have they been looking at it?
6 years.
Once criminals like Tony get their hands on usable patient numbers, they try and charge Medicare for the most expensive equipment possible, which requires having access to a list of Medicare codes.
And what were some of the best codes?
Artificial limbs, electric arms, electric wheelchairs. A regular patient, you can put them 2 artificial legs and an artificial arm, and they'll pay for it.
And that's what happened to former federal judge Ed Davis. He was one of those patients who started getting charges on his Medicare statement for artificial limbs.
I looked at it, and it had charges for a
prosthesis, and I knew I had my arms.
Did you get the left arm and the right arm on the same bill?
Both arms, same bill. Yeah.
And you obviously have two good arms.
The same ones I've had for over 70 years.
Didn't anybody at Medicare check to see if any of these charges were valid?
Sometimes they'll do, but by the time they did it, it was too late.
Too late?
Yeah, we already made 300, 400, 500,000 on it. And then we will never send them nothing back. And then in 30 days, they'll send an inspector to your office, and by that time,
it's all closed down.
It's all closed down.
So they would pay first and audit later.
Yes.
There's something I don't understand. I mean, you're saying essentially people just fill out the phony paperwork, they send a bill to Medicare, and they pay it.
That's why you have companies that can run for 60 and 90 days and bill for ridiculous things, because there are very few checks and balances to even determine whether these things, A, were medically necessary, B, were ever given, or C, even physically possible for a patient with the kind of conditions they have.
The FBI calls it pay and chase, and riding around with them, we saw plenty of examples. This tiny pharmacy in a Hialeah strip mall went from billing Medicare $13,000 in May to billing nearly $1 million a month later.
This place billed $800,000 in the month of June?
Correct.
It's a pretty small place.
By the time we were there in August, the FBI says the owners had already burned the company, shut it down, and moved on to another operation.
We were here last week. It was, there was stuff on the shelves. The business still had a name on it. You can still see from where the tape is that someone just took this off.
To understand just how preposterous all of this is, the FBI says that this tiny little store collected 6 times more money from Medicare in June than the largest Walgreens pharmacy in the state of Florida. Quite an achievement, since neither the FBI nor the proprietor of the bingo parlor next door ever saw a customer coming or going.
What's the deal with the pharmacy?
I've never seen people only twice.
No customers?
No customers. It's always been locked.
We obviously had a few questions to ask of the people at Medicare and requested an interview with the person in charge of preventing fraud. That turned out to be Kim Brandt, Medicare's Director of Program Integrity.
We went around with an FBI agent and a woman from Health and Human Services. They took us to storefront after storefront after storefront, billing $300,000 or $400,000 a month, and they were completely empty. Nobody there. I mean, how did they get away with that?
We're as frustrated by that as the law enforcement officials that you went out with. And in fact, our primary focus over the past 2 years has been to tighten our enrollment standards to make it so it's much harder for people like that to be able to get in the program and to be able to commit that kind of fraud.
Look, I'm sure that you're aware of these problems, but it doesn't seem like you're doing a very good job. I don't mean you personally, but I mean the government. This is still like a huge problem and getting worse, right?
Well, it really does come down to the size and scope of the Medicare program and the resources that are dedicated to oversight and anti-fraud work. One of our biggest challenges has been that we have a program that pays out over 1 billion claims a year, over $430 billion, and our oversight budget has been extremely limited.
About that, there is little dispute. Medicare has just 3 field inspectors in all of South Florida to check up on thousands of questionable medical equipment companies.
Clearly, more auditing needs to be done, and it needs to be done in real time.
Why is it taking Medicare so long to figure out they were being scammed?
I think lack of resources, probably. And then I think people, I don't think necessarily thought that something as well-intentioned as Medicare and Medicaid would necessarily attract fraudsters. But I think we have to understand that it certainly has.
The Obama administration is providing Medicare with an additional $200 million to fight fraud as part of its stimulus package, and billions of dollars to computerize medical records and upgrade networks should help Medicare catch more phony charges. But Tony, who has just begun serving his 12-year prison sentence, says there's no shortage of people in Miami waiting to take his place.
How many people in Miami were doing this?
I say at least 2,000 people. At least 2,000, 3,000 companies.
Well, presumably some of them are going to be legitimate.
I say less than 5%.
Less than 5%?
Yes.
If I went to the phone books and looked under medical equipment suppliers, 95% of the companies would be phony?
Yes, sir.
1-800-CON-MAN is a tale about credit card fraud, a billion-dollar business. And while that may not surprise you, I think what we found in Miami certainly will. It surprised us. For 4 long years before he was convicted of murder, a crafty con man named Danny Ferries ran a nationwide jailhouse shopping network. For he ran it all without ever leaving his cell in Miami's Dade County Jail, where, believe it or not, inmates have telephones right in their jail cells and can make local calls and 1-800 calls free of charge.
I would challenge you, Mr. Wallace, if they put you in a room the size of your bathroom at home for years at a time with a telephone, that I would challenge you to, that you would come up with some pretty inventive stuff to do, because you do everything through the phone.
And that's exactly what Danny Ferries did. Using a telephone from a large cell on the 10th floor of Miami's Dade County Jail, and later from this 6 by 8 foot cell, federal investigators acknowledge he managed to steal as much as $2 million worth of merchandise. And how did the business work? Accomplices on the outside provided Ferries with hundreds of credit card numbers taken from charge slips in hotel dumpsters. And then he used those credit card numbers to order merchandise from mail order catalogs by telephone, arranging for the items to be delivered overnight. Again, to accomplices on the outside who would sell the goods and split the proceeds with Ferries. Ferries even persuaded his fellow inmates to let him use their extension telephone as his own private line. You take the extension phone into your cell.
Actually, it was a vacant cell that I quite literally had turned into an office. We were having a ball.
And you did business?
Oh, yes, sir, a bumper business.
And it went on for 4 years, with Ferries ordering everything from collectible gold and silver coins to Rolex watches to video camcorders. And with the help of those accomplices on the outside, he hit states from one end of the country to the other.
Oh, it's so easy to find Confederates. I split right half with everybody. I mean, I never took more than half. I got robbed a lot, but again, you kind of take it on the chin, you know what I mean? It was, like you said, it was all free.
So he ordered cases of the best champagne and gourmet gift baskets and thousands of roses, and he had them sent to the families of other inmates and even to his prison guards.
They're working stiffs, you know, they're not making much money, and they're seeing this stuff going on, and they're hearing about Dom Perignon and trips to the Caribbean, and there I am in my cell. They know what's up. There's not, you know, and, you know, I tried to send at Christmas and on holidays, I tried to send out, you know, baskets. And
it cost them nothing?
Oh, no, perish the thought. No.
Of course, jail officials deny that guards accepted gifts, but one investigator told us off camera that he believes some guards did receive items from Danny. And we even found evidence that Danny dabbled in charity. I have here a Save the Children Federation, Inc., Westport, Connecticut, addressed to Daniel Ferris, 1151 Northwest 11th Street, Suite 104. That's your jail cell.
I'll be darned. Yeah.
Save the Children.
Well, yeah. Here, again, when you have nothing but 24 hours a day, and, you know, late night on Sunday night, after everybody has gone to bed for sure, they always put these little poor, pitiful, with flies crawling out of their nose, Biafran babies and stuff on it. I mean, heartbreaking stuff. 1-800 number, MasterCard and Visa. Mm-hmm. And it's just a phone call. My position was when the people got their credit card bill, and look at it and they say, well, I didn't order Save the Children here for $22, and they look at the poor children. They've all flashed on those poor, starving children. I can't believe that most of them aren't still paying that $22, Mr. Wallace. I would, if somebody did this to me and said, look, give, doggone it.
But what about the cops? Well, they were not amused by the jailhouse shopping network.
I think Danny Ferris is a convicted killer and a con man, nothing more.
Lieutenant Ross Hughes and fellow officer Raul Ubieta of the Metro Dade Police spent months building a case against Ferries, and they knew he had confessed to murdering a friend while under the influence of cocaine.
He's already in jail for murder, possibly facing the electric chair, so the fellow had no fear of any reprisal for the fraud that he was doing.
So he engaged in what is called the jailhouse shopping network.
And he was
very successful enterprise.
And he was very comfortable in that role.
And he would remain comfortably in business because Hughes and Ubieta's case against him was eventually dropped by the Dade State's Attorney. Why? Insufficient credible evidence, the State's Attorney said. The two Metro Dade investigators continued to warn jail officials about Ferries' continued phone access, but jail officials said it would violate Danny's rights to take his phone away.
He is allowed access to a telephone.
in order to steal?
He is allowed access to a telephone.
Well, I know, but
What he
you
did
know
with the
perfectly well he
telephone-
was stealing. I mean, this must have been a matter of some frustration to you guys, who've been after him now, according to this, for a year or two, and you're getting no place with it.
Anytime an investigation doesn't come to a proper conclusion for the investigator, it's frustrating. So,
Listen, you told the correction personnel, go in there and take the phone out of the cell. What'd they tell you?
if I recall the memo right, that he couldn't do that.
Jail officials finally did search Ferry's cell, seizing hundreds of credit card numbers. But that didn't put him out of business because he still had a telephone and one hidden credit card number.
And I had written this on the bottom of my bunk. And it was a woman's card, though. It was Regina Donovan was the name. And it was a good number. I said, well, here we go. We got to do something.
So Ferry's used the credit card number to pay for a newspaper ad and a telephone answering service.
And I ran an ad in USA Today saying, cosmetic package, $89.95 value for only $19.95. All major credit cards accepted. Please call and Regina Donovan Cosmetics, our 1-800 number.
But Danny never intended to sell any cosmetics. All he was after was a fresh batch of credit card numbers.
Well, the girls there, they take the orders and they write down, okay, thank you for calling Regina Donovan. May I help you? Yes, we saw your ad. Oh, yes. May we have, what credit card will we be using today? They wrote the number, the expiration. And then at the end of the day, I would call and they'd have all these numbers. It was incredible. And so I just got a whole new stack of numbers and I was off. Whew.
You could call him up any time of the day or night, and he was working around the clock, particularly when I was interviewing him.
Pete Collins is a freelance writer in Miami who is writing a book about Danny Ferry's and his jailhouse shopping network.
The operation was working in as many as 40 states. There were as many as 150 drop sites, dozens of employees, $750,000 documented in stolen goods, perhaps up to $2 to $4 million. And that was just during an 11-month window of his captivity.
And you
at
got
the Dade
this
County
mostly
Jail.
from the Secret Service?
I got all of that from the Secret Service.
That's right, the Secret Service. In addition to protecting the president and going after counterfeiters, they also work credit card fraud cases, and they began to investigate the jailhouse shopping network, too. They searched Danny's cell twice, and they confiscated over 1,000 stolen credit card numbers and catalogs. But Danny still had access to a telephone, and he still did business, just as he had for nearly 4 years.
Even on my cell door at ICDC in Dade County, I had a MasterCard and a Visa logo on the outside of my door. It was pretty wide open. So
everybody knew what you were doing, and you kept on doing it.
It was incredible. I just say.
I don't get it. Why would they give you access to a phone if they knew what you were doing?
I give a great phone.
I'm quite serious. Why would they keep letting you have access to a telephone?
I don't know. I of course, every time that they would say, if you don't stop this, we're going to take your phone away. I said, okay, then I won't do it anymore.
But Danny knew that he had a legal right to phone privileges while awaiting trial, so he was able to go on stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars in merchandise. Here we go. We wanted to find out more for ourselves about telephone access for the inmates at the Dade County Jail, so we went there to take a look. There's a guy on the phone right there. And nothing had changed. We visited Danny's old cell. This was the office that Danny Ferry's worked out of?
Yes, sir.
Not much bigger than somebody's bathroom. We were amazed to find a list of telephone numbers on Danny's old cell wall. So we called one. LL Bean Order Department. Can I order some merchandise this way? And I can order how much? Can I order 100 or 1,000 or $10,000 worth of stuff? No limit. My name is Mike Wallace, and I work for 60 Minutes, and I'm sitting in a cell. LL Bean hadn't heard about the jailhouse shopping network, but they did say that credit card fraud is a problem for them. And LL Bean had received an order from one Tommy Chappell, the inmate who inherited Danny's old cell. Explain something. I go into your cell, and suddenly I see on the wall
all the Danny's numbers.
Are those Danny's numbers? It turns out that Tommy Chappell was only one of many inmates who had learned how to use the jailhouse shopping network, courtesy of Danny Ferry's.
They don't even have to be terribly intelligent and only marginally capable. It's like a train, Mr. Wallace. I feel like I constructed a train, and just darn near anybody can drive a train. Heck, it's on a track. All you got to do is put the fuel in, credit card numbers, and this train will go.
But Tommy wasn't about to acknowledge to us that he had graduated from the Danny Ferry's College of Credit Card Manipulation. You've never done any of this?
No.
Raise your hand. Since Tommy Chappell wasn't going to confess, we asked Sergeant Ted Tate of the Metro-Dade Credit Card Squad what was going on, what is going on at the Dade County Jail.
Sergeant Tate, level with me. It's still going on.
Yes, sir, it is.
In Dade County.
Yes, sir, it is.
In ICDC. Over telephones. With credit cards.
It's going on in the Dade County jail system, yes, sir.
How come?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, surely Lonnie Lawrence, the director of Dade County Corrections, the man who requested a Secret Service search of Danny Ferry's cell, he could explain why the jailhouse shopping network was still alive and well.
There are legal guidelines that say that we shall provide phone access to inmates.
Inside the cell?
Yes. They don't care where you provide it as long as you provide it.
But what about inmates who abuse the phone system? For instance...
Let's say he's threatening the judge who put him away on the phone.
We still have the ability to do that.
You can take that phone away?
We take the phone away.
So you can actually take phone privileges away. What you have not been able to do is to take phone privileges away from guys who are in jail and scamming over the phone.
Well, I think that we've been able to restrict their phone privileges.
I went into Danny Ferris's old cell this morning, 3 hours ago.
Right.
Right there is the telephone. Right there on the wall is a list of 1-800 numbers and credit card numbers. I called LL Bean. They were taking my order. I was playing Danny Ferris.
Right over again.
Slick as it could be.
Well, you know, we don't have a perfect system.
And nobody knows that better than Danny Ferris. He was finally sentenced to 5 years for credit card fraud on top of an earlier life term for murder. And he was moved to the Charlotte Correctional Institution, a much tougher Florida state prison where, with prison guards looking on, we met a chastened Danny Ferris. He told us the prison officials here have made sure he can no longer practice his trade.
I would like to be very clear. I don't want them perish the thought that they might think I'm still wielding my telephonic sword. You know what I mean? I can't do that.
Why not?
Here in the state prisons, it's they're much more sophisticated.
The state prisons are more sophisticated?
Yes, they're in the way that.
So what you're saying is you're going straight, perforce, now at Charlotte Correctional Center.
Yeah, well, or having to go in a new direction because well, I mean, come on, I'm not just going to roll over, Mr. Wallace.
Isn't there a lady in Fort Lauderdale you've been talking to?
I don't know. Who you?
Didn't you offer to set her up in business and rent an apartment from her as a drop site?
Oh, I'm sure that I probably did.
Recently?
See, you would get a fella in trouble with all these folks standing around us here.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, you've just professed innocence. You don't do it anymore. That's what you just told me, Danny.
I know. Well, you know, here's what I've done.
But somehow you're in touch with a lady in Fort Lauderdale renting an apartment, which is going to be a drop site where you are ordering, or she is ordering, or somebody is ordering camcorders and things like this.
As he nervously takes a drink of his root beer.
I mean, you're a crook.
Well.
And a murderer.
That's what they say. Doggone, I wish they didn't say that, though.
Danny Ferris has been moved to yet another Florida state prison, and he's been told that he'll be isolated from his fellow inmates if he ever abuses the telephone privilege again. And Dade County jail officials say they now have new procedures for inmate phones. After we went down there to report this story, those inside jail cell telephones were removed.
There's no greater desperation than to be told that you or your child has a disease for which there is no hope. Many people with incurable illness look forward to the promise of stem cells. Stem cells have the potential to turn into any kind of cell, and in theory, they could repair damaged cells, though scientists tell us that we're years away from realizing that dream. There's no stem cell miracle today, so conmen have moved in to offer the hope that science cannot. Just look online and you will find hundreds of credible-looking websites offering stem cell cures in overseas clinics. 2 years ago, we began investigating stem cell charlatans. We worked with patients suffering from incurable diseases, and we discovered conmen posing as doctors, conducting dangerous medical experiments. You know, Mr. Stowe, the trouble is that you're a con man. Our report started a federal investigation. Since that story, we've been digging into the rapidly growing trade in fake stem cell cures, and we found something even more alarming: illegal stem cell transplants that are dangerous and delivered to your doorstep. They're scams that often bilk the desperate out of their last dollar of savings and their last ounce of hope.
I know you're tired.
Adam and Brandon Susser are 11-year-old twins. Adam has cerebral palsy. His brain was damaged by a lack of oxygen before he and his brother were born.
He's confined to a wheelchair. He needs assistance with all his daily living activities, from cleanliness to feeding to clothing.
Gary and Judy Susser have searched for anything that might improve on the judgment handed down by Adam's doctors.
The sentence of being a quadriplegic, the sentence of being totally blind, the pronouncement by physicians that we should put him away.
Those were the things that his regular doctors were telling you.
Correct. We were being advised, literally, to put him away. He's going to destroy your life.
So, back in 2003, the Sussers took a chance on the theory of stem cells. Adam was 3. They brought him to a doctor in Mexico who injected stem cells with no idea whether they would work.
We both decided that in the severity of his condition that we'd have to try it.
Apparently, there was no harm and no miracle.
The progress that he made after that was minimal at best, and therefore we didn't see any good coming out of it.
Today, people like the Sussers can find hundreds of sophisticated websites offering stem cell treatments for every hopeless disease.
I see how people are preyed upon by hucksters and charlatans. And people who have a special child don't need any more expense, don't need any more heartache, and don't need any more false promises. They need the truth and they need hope. Attaboy.
To help us learn the truth about the illicit stem cell industry, the Sussers agreed to work with us in an investigation of one stem cell laboratory. We focused on StemTech Labs of Ecuador because it offers cures for cerebral palsy and a long list of 70 incurable diseases. The website claims a modern-day medical miracle and says, "We are FDA registered," apparent approval from the Food and Drug Administration. The founder and director of StemTech Labs is an Alabama doctor named Dan Eklund. We've been tracking Dr. Eklund for months.
Hello, is Dan Eklund there, please?
In October, we asked the Sussers to contact Dr. Eklund. Eklund sent them a letter which offered the blind and paralyzed Adam the possibility of an improved level of consciousness, improved ability to see, to speak, to stand, and walk. What can stem cells really do today? We asked a scientist who's doing some of the world's most advanced studies in stem cells, Dr. Joanne Kurtzberg.
I believe stem cells have a lot of promise, but we are way at the infancy because real stem cells are very difficult to control as therapy. I personally think we're 10 years away from seeing real cell therapies that are working and are safe, but I do believe it will come.
Dr. Kurtzberg is a physician and the chief scientific officer of a stem cell research program at Duke University. She advises the federal government and is the co-director of this multi-million-dollar laboratory which works with stem cells harvested from umbilical cord blood. Dr. Kurtzberg told us there is no evidence yet that stem cells can treat cerebral palsy. Some of the diseases that we see stem cell cures offered for on the internet include multiple sclerosis.
There are no stem cell cures yet for multiple sclerosis.
Lou Gehrig's disease?
I wish there were, but there are not.
You know, I wonder how often it happens that you have to tell a patient, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." And then they come back to you 2 days later and say, "Well, I see all these cures on the internet."
I get many of those calls and emails and see many of those patients, but it's very dishonest to mislead people when there's nothing you can do.
But there's a lot that can be done for Adam Susser, at least according to Dr. Eklund, who spoke to the sussers from his lab in Ecuador.
Say hello to Dr. Dan. Adam.
Hello, Adam.
Can you see him, Doc?
Dr. Eklund's only examination of Adam came by teleconference. Eklund didn't know we were watching.
You think it would help him, you know, make him improve?
I think it's likely to help him, yes. I would say 75% chance that he would have a noticeable improvement.
Eklund proposed 4 treatments costing a total of $20,000. The sussers asked Eklund to treat Adam near their Florida home.
Again, my concern would be the legalities of it.
He's right to be concerned it would be a felony to use stem cells in an unapproved therapy or to sell them for export to the U.S. That's why we were surprised to see this on many websites, a shopping cart. We clicked on Eklund's StemTech Labs cart, and with no medical or scientific credentials, we bought 20 million umbilical cord stem cells for $5,000, shipped to America. We had the cells sent by the highest medical standard. Duke University suggested we use something called a dry shipper, cooled with liquid nitrogen. We sent the dry shipper to StemTech. StemTech sent the frozen cells to us, and we forwarded them to Joanne Kurtzberg. A computer chip inside our package verified that the cells were properly frozen all the way. Dr. Kurtzberg analyzed the cells. For comparison, look under the microscope. Healthy umbilical cord stem cells look like this. The cells we got from StemTech had disintegrated.
So these are the cells you purchased, and they are dying or dead.
We see all of these dead and disintegrating cells, and essentially cellular debris. Are there dangers of injecting that into someone?
There are huge dangers if you injected that into someone's blood or spinal fluid, because all these little fragments and debris would get trapped somewhere in the bloodstream and could cause a stroke, or in the brain could cause an inflammatory reaction.
This could actually do harm.
Yes, this could do a great deal of harm.
Remember, the sussers asked Dr. Eklund to treat Adam in the U.S., and last month, he got out of a van to meet Gary Susser at a Florida hotel where Eklund planned to do the transplant. We dug into Dr. Eklund's background, and we found things that he hadn't told the sussers. This is the document in which the state of Alabama revoked his medical license in 2005. The State Medical Commission said Dr. Eklund admitted that he prescribed controlled substances to a patient with whom he was having sex, prescribed controlled substances to a patient who he knew was a drug addict, and had sexual experiences with young female children. We also tracked down his laboratory in Ecuador, not exactly the state-of-the-art facility claimed in his website. The hotel room Gary Susser and Dan Eklund headed for was set up with a number of cameras that were tucked out of sight. Susser excused himself. Eklund was expecting to meet Judy and Adam, the blind and paralyzed 11-year-old, in whom he intended to transplant stem cells, cells from his lab that sold us the dangerous biomedical junk. Instead, we came in. Dr. Eklund, I'm Scott Pelley with 60 Minutes.
Oh, great.
How are you today?
I am surprised.
We've been working with the sussers on a story, and I want you to know that we're being recorded. And I wanted to ask you about the treatment that you propose for Adam. What would that be?
The treatment that he asked about was for stem cells, human stem cells.
And you think they're applicable for cerebral palsy?
Yes, I have seen them be effective in cases of cerebral palsy.
How does that work exactly?
Well, stem cells contain excuse me here. No one knows exactly, okay? But some stem cells do contain and give off chemicals which cause other cells to repair themselves.
In the letter that you sent the sussers, you described possible effects for Adam, which could include improved ability to see, improved ability to speak, improved ability to move arms and legs. You believe those things are possible?
I do.
What is your training in stem cells?
My training in stem cells was I studied for about 6 years going over the literature. And then I started producing stem cells in my lab.
You're self-educated, self-taught.
Mm-hmm.
Have you published any research?
No.
Frankly, Dr. Eklund, you have nothing to base your results on. There's no clinical trial, there's no blind study, there are no medical papers published.
That doesn't make any difference.
You know, you say it doesn't make any difference that you haven't done these studies. I would imagine...
The studies have been done in other countries.
I would imagine it would make a big difference to the sussers.
The studies have been done in other countries. These are not published in the United States because they cannot be published in the United States.
Where is this seen in the medical literature anywhere in the world? If you did the things that you describe in this paper, you would win the Nobel Prize.
No, if I did the things that are described in that paper, it would not be published. It would be suppressed, and you wouldn't hear about it.
Eklund told us breakthroughs with stem cells aren't published in scientific journals because of a conspiracy of drug companies and governments that he had trouble defining. That's when we told him we bought cells from his lab. When your cells are delivered, they're functioning, living stem cells.
Yes.
We purchased some stem cells from StemTech Labs 6 months or so ago and had them delivered to Duke University, which did tests on the stem cells, and they determined that the stem cells were dead.
Well, they must not have handled them appropriately then.
You're thinking that you handled them appropriately, but the stem cell laboratories at Duke University did not.
That would be my assumption, yeah.
I don't think that there's any chance they were damaged in shipment.
We asked Dr. Kurtzberg to listen to Eklund's theories.
Yes, I have seen them be effective in cases of cerebral palsy.
This is pretty scary, actually, that he would be saying these things, that he would be leading them on this way, because what he's talking about is very dangerous.
Is this a con, Dr. Eklund?
No, it's not a con. I have taken the stem cells myself. Would I take the stem cells if I thought that they were a con? No.
Putting them in an 11-year-old boy is an entirely different matter.
That's why I took care to explain the remotest possible difficulties, which have never been reported.
Without any medical studies that have been published in major journals that have suggested that stem cells have any efficacy.
You keep going back to this point, that they are not published in major medical journals. I'm telling you.
It is the standard of the world. I do keep going to that point.
I'm telling you that they are not going to be published in this country, because when someone does try to do it, then they have 60 Minutes come and visit them. And I think that's enough for me. Thank you.
We don't know where Dan Eklund went, but we do know the whereabouts of the two con men who were the subjects of our first stem cell story 2 years ago. In that investigation, we worked with patients Stephen Waters and Michael Martin, who suffered with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. They were promised miracles from Lawrence Stowe and Frank Morales, who offered a $125,000 stem cell therapy.
What, keep me out of a wheelchair?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Our story launched a federal investigation, and last week, Morales and Stowe were indicted. The indictment alleges they made $1.5 million with stem cell fraud. If convicted, they could face 20 years in prison. The patients who helped us, Stephen Waters and Michael Martin, lost their lives to ALS last spring. We will continue our reporting on the stem cell fraud tomorrow on our brand new morning broadcast, CBS This Morning.
Buy yourself a lottery ticket, and no matter how high your hopes of hitting the jackpot, the odds against it are even higher. But suppose someone promised that you could sweeten the odds by buying shares in pools of tickets from various lotteries around the world. Well, that's exactly what authorities say that a con man named Blair Down did. Operating out of Canada, Down's army of telephone solicitors, 500 of them working in shifts, targeted mostly elderly Americans because they were lonely and susceptible to anyone with a kind word. So all told, Down conned them out of an estimated $200 million to $300 million in one of the biggest telemarketing scams in history.
Everything's fine, okay?
Irene Taylor, a widow from Tyler, Texas, says a woman from Down Syndicate named Sharyn became one of her best friends, calling her constantly, promising she'd win a fortune if she would just send the money to invest in shares of foreign lottery tickets from Spain and Australia.
She would talk about my family and her family. She'd say, now, won't it be nice if you win money to help them, help your children do something, since you do not have money now that your husband's not there?
What would you send them, money or checks? Or?
Well, I sent checks at first, but then they got where they wanted MasterCard or Visa, so they could get their money immediately.
You gave them your credit card number?
Yes, and what kind of made me get suspicious was I got to being billed for some that I did not tell them to bill me for. And I would call Sharyn, and she'd say, well, I'll have it taken right off. Well, they would take it off, but maybe in 2 days then it was put back on. And I got $3,000 or $4,000 done that way.
Even so, for nearly 8 years, Mrs. Taylor kept sending money to Sharyn, about $15,000 in all, without ever getting a dime in winnings, and not even one lottery ticket to show for it.
So see, I'm a sucker for some things, Mike.
Sergeant Don Smith runs the Vice and Gambling Unit for the Vancouver, Canada Police Department. He says the victims were told that if they bought shares in foreign lottery tickets, not just a single ticket, they would win a fortune. But Smith says no fortunes ever came their way, and the buyers never even received proof that any lottery tickets were actually purchased. When people were ready to quit, Sergeant Smith says, Down Syndicate lied to them, saying they were winners, but could collect their jackpot only if they sent in more money. And incredibly, a lot of people did.
We've had victims arrive in Vancouver. They're convinced that they've won millions of dollars. They've hopped on the first plane available. They arrive in Vancouver hoping to go to this address, only to realize all of a sudden they're showing up in front of a post office box and nobody knows the location of the company.
Hi, Ray.
81-year-old Ray Koronek, a nursing home resident, was another Down victim. Down Syndicate had taken him for $40,000 by the time he taped a Down salesman trying to get even more money from him by calling him Dad.
I'm not dealing with you as a third person. You're my dad anyways. I don't have a dad, and I treat you as a dad. Dad, you had your
I tell you what, I'm so disappointed that I ever
you're not, because if you do your part properly, you will get your winnings. But you didn't do your part properly. That's the problem.
Oh, my God.
Okay?
Am I ever in trouble?
And I wish you the good...
If my sons ever found out how much money I gave you, they would never forgive me.
I wish you the good luck, and God bless you, Dad.
I'm going to probably even get sick over this.
Now, what kind of credit card do you have?
That's what makes it so despicable, is that they purposely go out of their way to develop a sucker list of elderly people, and they take great sport in trying to bilk them out of as much money as possible.
And this is James Blair Down, the man behind so much misery. A Canadian, Down built his telemarketing empire with the names of elderly Americans, potential suckers, that he bought from companies that compiled such lists for advertisers and salesmen. As seen in this undercover video, Down was living well with a taste that ran to racehorses and foreign bank accounts, and this $17 million mansion he bought on beachfront property in Barbados. So why didn't Canadian authorities stop Blair Down? Sergeant Smith says Canada lacked the incentive to really go after Down, who lived in Vancouver, because his victims were Americans only. But in America, as Down's victims grew into the hundreds of thousands, authorities were feeling the heat. Katrina Flaumer, the U.S. attorney in Seattle, had been pursuing Blair Down for years. So we asked Ms. Flaumer why stopping Down was so difficult.
It takes time and commitment
to start processes in different foreign countries. Here we were dealing with Canada, we were dealing with Barbados, we were dealing with Switzerland, we were dealing with the Cayman Islands, we were dealing with the Channel Islands.
You're mentioning all of those places because that's where he had stashed his money?
Correct.
Eventually, Down tired of all those U.S. investigators trying to corner him, so he engineered what his critics say was his biggest con of all. This time, they say, his victim was the U.S. government. In a deal negotiated with the U.S. attorney in Seattle, Down agreed to serve 180 days in jail in the United States and to pay back $12.4 million of the hundreds of millions that he had allegedly taken from elderly Americans.
That was chump change to him, given the money that he had secreted away in offshore accounts and other investments.
Do you know what happened to Blair Down?
Some time in jail.
6 months.
Slap on the wrist.
The story goes that he's made a profit of something like $200 million.
Pretty good. Of other people's money.
Anything at all to say to the people, to the elderly people who've lost some of their life savings?
We don't want to talk to the camera. We don't want to talk to the camera.
Down declined our repeated efforts to talk to him. Ms. Flaumer, the U.S. attorney in Seattle, says that Down's plea bargain was the best deal possible for everyone involved.
That's a result I think we should all be happy with.
Overall, one hears that perhaps he got away with $200 million or maybe $300 million, right?
I wouldn't presume to put a number on that.
Why not?
Because what we proved was that the $12.5 million which we seized was the result of international telemarketing and marketing of lottery shares. That's what we proved, that's what he pled guilty to, and that's the money that we seized and paid back to the victims.
And that's what you're ashamed of, that you were only able to get $12.5 million when people talk about $200 or $300 million from Americans.
I'm not at all ashamed of what we've done.
U.S. Attorney Flaumer doesn't believe that Down will walk away with $200 million because of expenses he incurred running his telemarketing empire. But Sergeant Smith disagrees.
We believe that his ventures netted him at least $210 million.
Netted him?
Yes.
After expenses?
Yes.
Because I talked to the U.S. attorney in Seattle, and she suggested that that was way out of line.
Well, that's one of the problems you have, or areas of concern when you have different agencies participating in an investigation, as to everybody has a small piece of the picture as opposed to the larger picture in its entirety.
It sounds like a good deal. In other words, okay, I'll take 6 months. You can have $12.3 million. Get off my back.
That's it. And I think when he agreed to that deal, he felt that was probably going to be the end of his problems.
But to Down's surprise, it wasn't. On his second day behind bars, he learned that someone, somehow, had managed to find and to freeze tens of millions of dollars of his assets that were stashed around the world. And that person wasn't anyone from the U.S. government. It was Martin Kenny, a Canadian citizen who runs a company out of Dublin, Ireland, called Interclaim.
You never lost any money to Blair Down?
No.
Never tried to scam you?
No.
Never been personally victimized by him?
Absolutely not.
So what is Interclaim's and Martin Kenny's interest in Blair Down?
The best way to define Interclaim is to say that we seek to recover the fruits of economic crime in partnership with the victims. It's a special new company. We don't think there's another one like it anywhere in the world.
And as far as we can determine, there isn't. Martin Kenny and his backers have already spent more than $2 million betting that they can do what the government did not, force Blair Down to return more than $100 million they say that he took from elderly U.S. citizens. If successful, Down is challenging their actions in a Canadian court. If successful, Interclaim will split down the middle with Down's victims whatever money they recover. But first, Martin Kenny had to find Down's assets. So when Blair Down's brother and sister-in-law, who were suspected of hiding Down's riches, a charge they've denied, when they embarked on a Christmas cruise from Santiago, Chile to Buenos Aires, Interclaim's undercover spies were right there with them.
We arranged with the captain of the vessel to sit at table with them, to befriend them throughout the duration of the trip. Tim Down, Blair's brother, spent about $70,000 on the trip, lost $40,000 in gambling on the vessel, and then invited our operatives to Calgary to get to know them more and to wine and dine them in their restaurant called Chow Baby.
Meanwhile, before Down went to jail, Interclaim agents were following and covertly videotaping him at family dinners, at business meetings, even at this strip club. Then, with the details of what they say were Down's ill-gotten gains, Interclaim secretly convinced a court in Vancouver to freeze $100 million in Down's assets, including 27 commercial buildings in Calgary owned by his brother and sister-in-law. Interclaim's goal? Force Down into bankruptcy so that his assets could be liquidated and given to his victims. He didn't know that you guys were going after him.
He did not know that many courts, 8 courts in 7 countries, had given us the most extraordinary of relief that unlocked the secrets to how he had laundered the proceeds of his crime and where that wealth sat.
What did you think when you first heard what Interclaim had done to Blair Down?
I was happy. The only way you can slow these people down is you have to hurt them financially. And he stands the chance of losing everything. That makes me very happy.
Not so happy was the Down family lawyer who called Interclaim, quote, an international commercial terrorist who practices extortion. And what did the U.S. Attorney in Seattle think of Interclaim's action? Interclaim grabbed commercial buildings in Alberta. They got his $17.5 million home in Cove Spring, Barbados. They got access to his telephone, accounting, real estate, and lawyers' records around the world. And court orders issued in Vancouver froze Down's bank accounts, along with hundreds of thousands of dollars in the trust accounts of Down's lawyers.
Interclaim hasn't been awarded those damages. They have simply frozen assets preliminary to litigation that may go on for years.
Ms. Flower says the important thing is that everyone who lost a lot of money has gotten all of it back thanks to her office. But Martin Kenny says that simply is not so.
All I know is that we estimate there are about 1 million victims out there, and only 480 people have received any kind of compensation to date.
And Kenny says the U.S. government had no way of identifying all of Down's victims because the U.S. government did not have access to all of Down's sucker lists. You know, the U.S. attorney told us yesterday that there was nobody out there, as far as she knew, who lost a lot of money, who got nothing back. But you're one of the people.
Well, I didn't get nothing back.
And you lost a lot of money.
Well, to me, it's a lot of money. It may not be to some people.
This past summer, while Irene Taylor was still trying to get her $15,000 back, James Blair Down walked out of this Seattle jail after 180 days behind bars. Having paid his debt to society, he is now a free man. Last August, a Canadian judge ruled that Interclaim had no legal standing in this case, but the judge, obviously sympathetic to the victims, virtually invited an appeal. Interclaim, the judge wrote, offers the most realistic opportunity for the compensation claims of the victims, and Interclaim is in fact appealing. Meantime, the bulk of Down's assets remain frozen.